In 2025, aliens occupy Earth and first enclose cities with 300-meter walls to limit human movement. Welcome to day 348 of our occupation. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. One day, truck driver Will bids farewell to his wife Katie and their children, Grace and Bram, and drives to work through the streets of Los Angeles, patrolled by soldiers in red helmets. Later, from his conversation with a colleague, it becomes clear that Will is planning an illegal trip beyond the wall. He reaches a smuggler who places him in a metal box and covers it with ice. That's when Will discovers he has a fellow passenger, to whom he reveals he's looking for his 12-year-old son left behind the wall. Soon the vehicle enters through the gates, then an explosion occurs, flipping the truck over. Dazed, Will crawls out only to be captured by the red helmets. That same morning, Katie goes to an underground dealer for forbidden insulin. By restricting medicine, the invaders weed out the weak, making it very hard to obtain. She presents a bottle of alcohol for trade, but finds the insulin spoiled. She has to fight her way out with a pistol, risking drone detection and death for all. But Katie can't afford to be robbed. Meanwhile, Will is imprisoned, unable to call his wife. Katie is indeed worried, as walking the streets at night is prohibited. Then her sister Maddie arrives with her son, who needs the insulin. Katie assures she will find the medication and asks to stay with the children. She goes to her husband's colleague, who lies about not knowing Will's whereabouts. Katie has to return home empty-handed. Suddenly an alarm blares over the city. Katie hides under a military truck parked at the curb. A drone hovers above just as a prisoner is shoved into the vehicle. Just when Katie seems doomed, the truck starts moving and the drone flies away. The woman makes it home. In the morning, she visits her friend Broussard and reports Will's disappearance. It turns out he, like her husband, was with the FBI before the aliens arrived. He asked her to return home while he checks his remaining contacts, but Katie goes to the hospital, where she learns of the explosion at the city's entrance. Amidst the chaos, she sneaks into a storeroom and steals several vials of insulin. In prison, Will hears his cellmate's confessions, soon to be sent to work at a factory for the aliens. Then soldiers arrive, one shouting Will's real surname. He's recognized and taken to the Green Zone, where the world's leaders now reside. There, he's met by Snyder, a representative of the Los Angeles governor. Snyder knows Will's military and FBI background and his knack for catching dangerous criminals. Since the military and police vanished after the aliens' arrival, Will had to hide, but now Snyder needs his help, offering his family full protection in return. The Masters demand security, so Will lead a special unit, infiltrate the rebels, and capture their leader Geronimo. As the alien spacecraft is about to launch, Snyder takes Will to the balcony, hoping to persuade him to switch sides. If he refuses, his family will be sent to the factory. At night, the red helmets bring Will home, frightening his family, but he reassures them, explaining he was just in an accident. However, Katie realizes her husband is lying. Hearing he went to look for Charlie, she cries, but the news of Snyder's proposal enrages her. She would never become the wife of a traitor. In the morning, the family is woken up by the smell of bacon, and upon entering the kitchen, they find Snyder there. He has prepared breakfast and even brewed coffee, which is now impossible to find. As he eats, he lists all the benefits of their new status: security, a personal tutor for the children, good food and work. Moreover, the aliens allow the couple to reopen their old bar. However, Will is only willing to agree in exchange for the return of his son, who is in another block. Snyder promises to consider this option. The next morning, Katie arrives at an unassuming house where members of the resistance, whom she informs that the occupiers have hired her husband to find them, await her. The following morning, Will goes to work, quickly realizing that Snyder deceived him. Instead of becoming the commander of a special unit, he is subordinated to Phyllis, who assigns him to find the guy who planted an explosive device at the city entrance. He is partnered with Beau, an old policeman. Meanwhile, Katie arrives at her bar and finds her lost son's belongings. Broussard interrupts her cleaning, wanting to know what the police have found out about the explosion at the customs, but Will has just started his job and has no information yet. Meanwhile, Will and Beau approach the house where the girlfriend of the wanted criminal lives, and by deception, they force him to run out the back door. The agent catches up with him when suddenly a drone appears. Will fearlessly looks directly into the lens, and it instantly disappears. The police bring the detainee to the station, where Will's arrested colleague is found. The man begs Phyllis to release him as his informant, but she refuses. Then Will goes to his trailer, but his family is no longer there because the woman and child are entering his house at that moment. After hiding the mother and son upstairs, Katie drives to Broussard as the couple needs new documents, but he refuses to help as the resistance cannot take risks. Katie leaves. At home, she confronts Will, who, learning that his friend's family is with him, takes them to a man who makes fake documents. On their way, they are stopped by the Red Helmets. However, after checking the pass, they let him go with apologies, leaving Katie in a state of shock. They safely arrive at the Masters, and while he makes the documents, Will tells Katie that he caught the guy who planted the bomb. And once he finds Geronimo, they will be able to bring Charlie back. Later, Will takes the woman and child to a camp where displaced people live. Katie meets with the resistance leader. Alexander calms her down, as the caught boy belongs to another group, but he promises to warn them. At the station, Will discovers that a group of prisoners is being prepared for shipment to the factory. Phyllis asks him to resign himself. During the arrival, the city's entire defense was destroyed in 8 hours. What can a bunch of rebels do? At night, Katie comforts her distraught husband when he is informed that the suspect has divulged the location of his accomplice's hideout. He leaves, and Katie rushes to the phone to warn Broussard. Meanwhile, the prisoners are brought to the location, forced to strip, disinfected, and then redressed. At the same time, the Red Helmets arrive at the location named by the detainee and find only the bodies of rebels. Will realizes that there is a spy among the police. The next morning, a man with a card enters an inconspicuous house on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Immediately, a radio broadcast begins with calls to overthrow the occupation, voiced by Geronimo. The Red Helmets detect the transmission and head to the location. At the same time, Bram duplicates the broadcast recording and hides the cassettes under the bed, but the military, storming into the house, find no one there. That same day, Katie participates in a resistance armed attack on a food truck for the first time. During the operation, one of their comrades, Kim, is fatally wounded. Katie tries to help him, but Broussard finishes the boy off, shocking Katie. Then, drones arrive and start shooting random passers-by. However, Broussard calculates the authorities' response time to the incident. After the operation, Katie rushes home and barely manages to wash off the blood traces. She is so shaken that she doesn't want to explain anything and locks herself in her room. That day at school, Bram gives a cassette to his teacher, who notices a change in the pattern of the alien ship's takeoffs. He saw a very large object circling Earth in the sky and now intends to make a more powerful telescope. The police arrive at the scene of the incident. Will notices the body of a boy who was clearly finished off. Phyllis orders to take his photo and quickly learns his name. After that, the Red Helmets go to his house and arrest his parents. Will is outraged by this and fails to notice Broussard in the crowd, who heads to the resistance base and reports what happened. But Alexander is confident that Kim left no traces. Will then goes home, where Katie explains her morning behavior with the things found in the bar belonging to their son. Distraught, Will blames himself for being powerless against the Masters, but his wife promises her support. Later, Katie goes to meet Broussard. He justifies his actions as saving Kim from torture, but now she needs to extract everything her husband learned during the investigation from him. At the same time, Bram's friend asks for his help and leads the boy to an underground tunnel beneath the wall, where her brother slipped and injured his leg. It turns out their father worked there before the arrival, and now they use the tunnel to get beyond the wall. Will and Bo go to a cultural center, listed among the places visited by the deceased Kim, and find a rebel weapons cache. At the same time, Bram's friends tell him they've been going to the other side for 6 months to get food, as there's no one beyond the wall. Alexander learns about the lost weapons and asks Broussard to warn Katie about the inadmissibility of her husband's actions. He fulfills this request, but Katie is more concerned about her family's safety. Nevertheless, in the evening, she opens the bar to visitors. Suddenly, in the midst of the festivities, Snyder walks in. The man congratulates everyone on the opening of the establishment and then explains to Will that by revitalizing such places, the Masters allow people to safely release tension. Hearing this, Katie becomes furious, thinking they've sold out to the aliens for the sake of getting their son back. But Will is convinced that by continuing to work for Snyder, he will be able to find Charlie. Later, he speaks with Bo again about the spy. However, the former policeman, who has faced betrayal, doesn't believe in such a possibility. Meanwhile, Katie tells Broussard that the quick finding of the Resistance's premises is explained by a huge database in a woman who knows how to use it. She's ready to reveal her name if Will remains unharmed. Broussard swears to this. The next day, a squad of red helmets bursts into the school. The military brutally arrest a teacher and beat a student. Returning to the base, one of them removes his helmet, revealing himself to be Broussard. Later, he explains to Alexander that he learned the duty schedule of the Red Helmets. Now they have a chance to be in the right place at the right time. That same day, Phyllis shows Will information about the Los Angeles rebels. If they unite and go on the offensive, the entire block will be cleaned out. She hopes Will understands what this means for him and his family and counts on his loyalty. Meanwhile, Katie takes the children for a walk with Lindsay, the governess appointed by the authorities, and turns on the streetlight, sending a prearranged signal. The sound of breaking glass is heard. The woman counts to 10, then pulls out a fire extinguisher. Only after extinguishing the fire does she call emergency services. The red helmets and Will arrive. He is outraged to find that his house is being searched, but such is the protocol. Katie is asked to go to Phyllis for interrogation. She promises the family enhanced security. Moreover, the neighbors are warned that if something happens to them, they will be held responsible. Katie is shocked, as now they will be feared. Phyllis interrogates her about everything, even the personal relationship between husband and wife. Meanwhile, Maddie goes to the Commission for the Preservation of Cultural and Artistic Items in search of work and introduces herself to Charlotte, the director, hoping to become her assistant. After his wife's interrogation, Will confronts Phyllis, but she shows him tapes found under Bram's bed and advises him to keep a closer eye on his son. For now, she'll hold on to these pieces of evidence. Furious, Will drives home, and after a tough conversation, Bram shows his father posters. Their appearance in the city signals the release of a new broadcast by Geronimo. Katie manages to extract a promise from Alexander not to touch her husband, and in return identifies her husband's boss, Phyllis, in a photo. Later, another broadcast by Geronimo begins in the city. This time, the police immediately detect the signal coming from the library and rush there. The man hears their approach but utters his final words, calling for resistance. He is arrested, although Will is sure it's not Geronimo, greatly disappointing Snyder, who had already informed the masters of their victory. That same day, Maddie witnesses Charlotte's anger, who needs a painting by a specific artist. Maddie reports she knows who had collections in the city, as she worked as an art historian. Meanwhile, the arrested man confesses during interrogation that he found the text for the broadcast in a pipe. The police go to the site and verify that the indicated pipe leads to the green zone. Charlotte's workers find art items in the house Maddie mentioned. In gratitude, the owner takes her on board and promises to help with insulin. That same day, Phyllis informs Will that as a sign of trust, she destroyed the tapes. The man goes home where Bram admits he listened to Geronimo because he was the only one who instilled hope in people. Katie arrives at the bar earlier than usual and finds Phyllis in the hall, who wants to talk to her alone. Phyllis talks about her husband and draws parallels with Will, who loves his wife so much that he doesn't see who she really is. She shows surveillance photos from the truck attack site and warns Katie that she's gotten involved with the wrong people. If Katie wants to survive, she will now work for her. After the conversation, Phyllis returns home, where her paralyzed husband lies. She greets him, but upon entering the living room, she finds Broussard there. Phyllis immediately understands why he came and asks him to kill her husband too. Broussard shoots. The next day, Bo and Will go to the crime scene and find the word Geronimo written on the wall. Snyder is furious because Phyllis was very close to the masters and demands the criminal be found. A message comes in about the capture of one of the Geronimo group. Will interrogates the young man, who gives an address in the green zone. The red helmets burst in there, finding a concealed room and several people who call themselves the Geronimo group. Meanwhile, Bram, accompanied by his girlfriend, passes under the wall and ends up in a deserted city where they find necessary supplies in a huge warehouse. Back in Los Angeles, news is broadcast that the underground has been eliminated, although Will doesn't believe it. Snyder once again becomes enraged because he sees that the captured couple doesn't look like terrorists. He refuses to fulfill the agreement about searching for Charlie and appoints Will as the head of the group. Will immediately begins searching for the mole, and Phyllis's assistant, Jennifer, reminds him of his wife, suggesting he might be the source of the leak. Returning home, Will sees Bram giving his sister markers brought from beyond the wall, but the son lies that he traded them for oranges. Snyder interrogates a man who claimed to be Geronimo, but he confesses that he is just an actor. Snyder convinces him to play out his role in exchange for being sent to another block. At the same time, Bram rushes to his teacher and promises to get him a powerful lens for his telescope. Will, secretly from his wife, searches the bar but finds nothing incriminating except for a book he doesn't recognize. The trial of Geronimo is broadcast on all channels, featuring relatives of the terrorism victims, and a scaffold for execution is erected in the square. The actor plays his role, believing Snyder's promises to eradicate terrorism. He realizes he's been deceived only when he finds himself on the scaffold, but can do nothing about it. Immediately after the execution, Snyder invites Will to join him, promising to show him something unusual. At the same time, Alexander's group prepares for a new attack, with Katie among the rebels. On the way, Will expresses his outrage to Snyder, who achieved nothing by executing the actor, but Snyder reminds him of the need to pacify the population and that he's bought time to search for the real Geronimo. Snyder's car moves through the city, guarded by a group of red helmets, including Broussard. At one of the turns, a decoy road worker sends them on a detour, and when the convoy slows down, Broussard shoots his colleagues. Snyder tries to run, but Will locks the doors as the car is armored. Rebels, disguised in red helmets uniforms, shoot at the car and manage to pull the door off, but Will shoots from inside and still gets Snyder out of the fire. Drones appear, but the rebels manage to escape. Will leads Snyder into the bar where Katie arrives at the same time. Snyder is hysterical, but Will cannot guarantee protection by his own means. Katie asks Will in private not to risk himself for such a worthless person, but Will cannot leave a person without help. Realizing that the phone doesn't work, he goes outside to a payphone to call for backup. Meanwhile, Alexander, learning about Will's role in saving Snyder, is furious, but then Katie communicates via radio that the traitor is in the bar. She returns to Snyder and keeps the conversation going to lower his guard. He boasts about being a professor of economics, which earned him a high position. He mentions there are 7 more colonies, but he doesn't know what happens beyond them. Will returns, announcing that he has managed to call for reinforcement and it's on its way. Katie bandages Will's wound, and he confesses that Geronimo is a collective image, not one person. Katie asks not to interfere with Snyder's killing, but Will reminds her that another will take his place. Then, Snyder reveals that his people have found their son, and he is currently negotiating Charlie's return. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door. They hide Snyder in the bathroom. Broussard enters in a red helmet's uniform and searches the place. Katie leads him to the basement, asking to ensure Will's safety, but he can't guarantee anything as her husband is always diving into the fray. Broussard eventually leaves, but Will is sure he is a member of the resistance and will return with backup. They barricade the doors with Snyder, who again mentions Charlie, infuriating Katie as she's tired of his blackmail. Meanwhile, the rebels try to break into the bar, but fail. A frightened Snyder tells Will that the masters have tested virtually every person, thus filtering out those they don't need, but he has never seen the aliens himself. As the rebels continue to press, Will orders Katie to hide, readying himself to defend Snyder. Then a smoke grenade is thrown in, the militants storm in. Will opens fire. When one of the rebels finds Will, Katie shoots him, but Broussard aims at her, and her husband forces her to drop the weapon. The rebel herds them into the basement and leaves. However, Will finds a machine gun and chases after him, but by the time he gets upstairs, everyone is gone. Then, the real red helmets arrive and pull Snyder from the closet where Will had hidden him. In the evening, Will tries to reassure Katie, explaining that Snyder's tribunal was just a farce. There is no people's hero, and those who attacked them have no relation to Geronimo. Meanwhile, Alexander concludes that Katie is a double agent, simply leading them on. Meanwhile, Maddie starts a relationship with Charlotte's husband, Nolan, who is the leader of the New Age Preacher Church. At the same time, Will identifies Broussard by photo, having seen him among the attackers, and receives an order to find and arrest him. The red helmets head to his address, but when they begin to storm the house, it explodes. Will questions Broussard's squadmates, and one mentions a distinctive feature, a tattoo on the chest, which Will recognizes as a Special Forces sign. Broussard infiltrates a restricted area, where he steals the corpse of a dark-skinned man of similar age and build. Along with Alexander, they place it in a car and burn it. Throughout, the leader convinces Broussard of Katie's betrayal. Later, the police find a burnt car with a charred body inside, matching the description of the bar attacker, but Will once again doubts everything. Katie tries to contact the underground, but can't manage to do so. Finally, she finds an encrypted message with the name of a meeting place where a car with Broussard at the wheel awaits her. Meanwhile, Will's assistant Jennifer finds in the database 14 people with Broussard's face, and he realizes that Broussard is not just a military man, but a former FBI agent. Broussard takes Kate out of the city and asks her difficult questions, as she shot one of her own, but Katie reminds him that she laid out one main condition from the start: her family must be untouchable. She joined the fight and served the cause faithfully. He doubts her loyalty. She leaves, unwilling to continue the conversation. Broussard goes to one of the resistance members, Rachel, and tells her about Alexander's order to eliminate Katie and how he couldn't go through with it. Will arrives at Snyder's in the Green Zone and reports that Broussard is called something entirely different, and he's very skilled in his field, but he'll definitely find him. In response, Snyder gives him an envelope containing a recent photo of Charlie. Will brings it to Katie, and through tears she asks her husband to rid themselves of Snyder's control. He promises to do so when he is ready. Meanwhile, Charlotte learns about Maddie and Nolan's relationship and threatens to fire her. Nolan decides to remind his wife of her place and offers Maddie to become his assistant. The police receive new information, with which Will goes home. He shows his wife a photo of Broussard and tells her that his fingerprints were found in their bar. This means he was there before. Katie says she doesn't know him, but Will shows her photos of his victims, and she recalls that he indeed visited them and said he lived in his mother's house and was fixing it. Jennifer immediately finds Broussard's mother's house through receipts from construction stores. Rachel comes to Katie, confessing that Broussard indeed killed many, but it's part of the resistance. Katie reminds her that she almost became one of his victims, but Rachel reminds her that Broussard didn't carry out that order. Then Katie calls Broussard and warns him that Will has figured him out. The red helmets go to Broussard's mother's house, but it's empty. The abandoned tools make it clear he received a warning. Will calls out to a neighbor who turns out to be Alexander, and he says he hasn't seen his neighbor. Will leaves but then stops. On Broussard's table lies the same book as in his wife's bar. Will's partner ends up at a factory where people often get sick and die. It turns out the factories are built on the moon. Will shows his children a photo of Charlie and admits he only started working for the government to get him back. That morning, the governor of the Los Angeles block arrives at Snyder's to inform him that the chief minister of the Pacific region is coming for an inspection. He assures everything is going well, but the woman is very doubtful. Katie goes to Rachel and learns that her underage sons are also in the resistance. She is stunned by the woman's courage, but still announces her departure from the group, fearing for her family. Rachel promises her support. Alexander calls Will and declares that his wife is the mole leaking information to the rebels. He sets up a meeting place. Will goes there. He immediately recognizes Broussard's neighbor, who confesses that he is the head of the cell and is willing to betray everyone for the right to leave the block. Meanwhile, Broussard meets with the leader of the youth cell of the rebels, from whom he receives information about the arrival of an important person. Will returns to Beau and tells him everything. Later, he goes to Snyder and conveys Alexander's conditions. Snyder demands a personal meeting. In the evening, Katie returns to the topic of Charlie. If Snyder knows where he is, why can't he bring him back? But the conversation shifts to the meeting with Alexander. He reveals he is ready to betray the entire cell, and Katie immediately leaves for the bar, signaling Broussard along the way. Bram and his teacher observe the moon and notice changes in its surface. It seems that's where the alien mines and warehouses are located. That evening, Broussard comes to the bar, where Katie tells him about the leader's betrayal. He immediately goes to Alexander and starts asking questions, but Alexander demands he stop all communication with Katie and prepares for a new operation. The next day, Will takes Snyder to the meeting place with Alexander, who confesses he just wants to survive. He needs a universal pass to travel between blocks. In exchange, he gives a list of the group led by Broussard and admits they are planning an operation to eliminate the minister. He will set up a meeting for Broussard, where the police will arrest him. Afterward, Will take him beyond the wall and give him the pass. Later, Broussard arrives at the designated place in the market. Rachel and Katie are also there, and upon spotting the red helmets, Katie immediately warns Broussard. A rebel throws firecrackers, causing panic, and people scatter as the military opens fire. Rachel dies, and Broussard escapes. Will goes to Alexander's house, which is under police guard, and announces the cancellation of the deal with Snyder. He is ready to let him run, but Snyder starts talking about Katie signing his death warrant. Will shoots the traitor and blames it all on Broussard. At night, people see Rachel's hanged family, and Katie promises Broussard her support. Will lets his wife know he's aware of her participation in the resistance. The following night, a spontaneous uprising occurs during which several Red Helmets die. Bo asserts that people's patience has run out. Will informs Snyder that he has information about a new rebel cell located beyond the wall. Apparently, there exists an unknown passage to the authorities. He asks for permission to let them go beyond the wall and check. Snyder agrees but assigns them a guard. Meanwhile, Broussard and Katie go to the leader of the youth cell, who proposed a joint attack on the minister. Everything is to happen in the subway, now used only by the masters. Will and Bo, having gone beyond the wall, climb a skyscraper and survey the entire city. They then simulate an attack on themselves. While their guard tries to figure out what happened, their commander finds a map supposedly lost by the attackers. Later, Will points out to Snyder the marks on the map, indicating the rebels' attack points. Snyder reports the found tunnel under the wall. Members of the youth cell show Katie a micro-drone, shaped like a bee, capable of flying anywhere and gathering any information. The rebels finalize the attack plan. Broussard teaches Katie how to shoot. At that time, Red Helmets led by Snyder come to Nolan's house, accusing Charlotte of hiding valuable paintings from the masters and arresting her. That evening, Katie finds a book about the benefit of the arrival, given to her daughter by Lindsay. She immediately calls Will and tells him about how the new church is indoctrinating children. Will then informs her that they will move to Bo's house, located beyond the wall, accusing her of spying on him, but Katie can no longer bear it. They constantly lie to each other, and it's killing their family, and hiding, even beyond the wall, is impossible. Will asks Bo to run alone. Katie and Broussard, killing guards, descend into the subway, open a backup entrance, and the group infiltrates inside. The rebels cause an explosion, derailing the train. Searching the wrecked wagons, people find an alien's body. Will learns about this and heads to the station, where the governor soon arrives, announcing the kidnapping of a master. There was already an incident when 2 aliens died, leading to Dallas's destruction, so people must understand what awaits Los Angeles if they don't find the missing master. At the same time, a group of rebels transports the alien to a secret location, blocking signals with metallic foil. Will rushes home and asks Maddie to hide the children. She suggests taking them to the green zone. He tries to find Katie, and Bram gives him a secret number his mother received the day before. While the rebels try to move the alien to another location, a curfew is declared in the middle of the day. Maddie and the children end up in a huge queue, and as they try to break through, Bram runs away. Meanwhile, the rebels hijack a Red Helmet's car and load the alien into it. At the same time, the police receive subway camera footage. Will recognizes Katie but doesn't show it. Bram runs to his teacher and leads him to the tunnel. Meanwhile, the group that kidnapped the alien moves through the city in a police car and witnesses a house being shot to intimidate residents. Snyder is removed from his position, but the governor can do nothing. Meanwhile, the alien is brought to a laboratory, shielded from any observation methods, and they attempt to open his suit. Will gives the rebel codebook to Jennifer. Together, they review the operation footage from Broussard's arrest attempt and identify the youth cell leader, who is also in the database. The rebels figure out how to activate the communicator on the alien's wrist when Will knocks on the door. He asks to hand over the kidnapped and run, or he won't be able to save them, but Katie refuses to open the door, instead breaking the isolation, forcing the rebels to flee through a secret passage. At that moment, drones converge on the house. Katie opens the door, and Will calls the police. The alien is taken away. Snyder thanks him and gives him a universal pass beyond the wall. Simultaneously, Bram and the teacher descend into the tunnel and are caught by the police. Snyder is taken away by the patrol. Will goes beyond the wall to find his son, and Katie returns to an empty house. This concludes the first season. The crew of the spaceship is in cryogenic sleep. Astronaut George Taylor is dictating his final report. Exactly half a year ago by the ship's time, they left Cape Canaveral. Over 7 centuries have passed on Earth during this period. The people who sent them on this journey have long since died, but Taylor has no regrets about what they've done. Everything seems different from here. The flow of time is distorted and space is limitless. The only thing he would like to know is whether humanity, the miracle of the universe that sent him into the sky, continues to wage war. A last glance at the clock. It's March 27, 2673 on Earth. He looks at his comrades and lies down in his place. After a while, the ship makes an emergency landing on an unknown planet and finds itself in the middle of a body of water. The crew wakes up and realizes that they have slept much longer than the calculated time. But the most horrifying shock is the death of the only woman, Stewart. At that moment, water begins to enter the ship. They need to evacuate, especially since the samples showed that the atmosphere is suitable for breathing. Looking at the ship's clock, which is frozen at Earth time, November 25, 3978, the crew abandons the sinking ship. Boarding a life raft, the humans sail to shore, marveling at the grandeur of the surrounding nature. There is no sign of intelligent life anywhere. Taylor reminds them that they are 320 light-years from Earth on an unknown planet in the constellation Orion. It is impossible to determine more precisely as no one has had time to look at the instrument readings. Upon landing on the shore, Taylor takes inventory of what they were able to salvage from the ship. A pistol, 20 rounds of ammunition, a first aid kit, and a 3-day supply of food and water. The only question now is how long is a day here? They are discussing the strange death of Stewart, apparently caused by depressurization. It seems they were flying for 18 months, while on Earth it has been about 2,000 years. There is no hope of returning, and time has erased everything they knew. Therefore, they need to start studying this planet. Analysis show that nothing can grow here as there is very little carbon dioxide. But there is nothing dangerous to human health either. They have 72 hours left until they run out of food. Landon sets up a small flag of the United States of America on the shore and the astronauts set off on their journey. The surroundings are strange and wild, bizarre rocks and lifeless canyons. The people almost get trapped under landslides several times. Thunderbolts light up the sky without bringing rain, and the sky itself is covered with clouds with no satellites or landmarks. One thing they know for sure, there's a time gap between them and Earth. Their loved ones died 20 centuries ago. Even if they returned, no one would remember them. Taylor urges his comrades on. Why did they embark on this flight? Was it for fame, new knowledge, or the opportunity to live longer? But now they have lived much longer than any other human on Earth. Only Taylor set out on this journey because he's a dreamer. He is confident that there must be something better than humans in the universe. At that moment, Dodge calls out to them. He has found life. A barely noticeable green shoot has sprouted from rocky desert. This means there are plants here and they need to find them. The group continues forward. Every way they look, they see unfriendly rocks, but ahead they see green bushes and some strange crosses that resemble scarecrows. After walking a little further, the astronauts are thrilled to finally see water ahead. The excited group quickly sheds their clothes and jumps in. After that, they swim towards the shore and notice human footprints on the sand. Suddenly, they see dark figures stealing their clothes. The men chase after the thieves, who leave behind obvious traces of their path such as broken clothing and scraps. Soon they come across their torn clothes and put on whatever remains. Finally, they reach a plain and see many people behaving quite strangely. They are silent and pay no attention to the astronauts, instead calmly gathering and eating different fruits. The Earthlings are puzzled as their fellow humans seem almost feral. Luckily, they are not cannibals. Suddenly, an ominous sound comes from the forest and the people start running. The astronauts try to understand what is happening and suddenly see armed riders. Shots are fired and then monkeys appear on the clearing, apparently hunting the humans. The Earthlings attempt to flee and in the heat of the chase they split up. Shots are heard from all directions and Dodge is killed. Taylor, along with others, runs towards the river, and just when it seems like he's about to make it, one of the monkeys shoots him in the neck, rendering him unconscious. The tied-up astronaut is thrown into a cell with other prisoners. He's surprised to see the monkeys taking pictures as if it's a souvenir. George is brought to a hospital where he's examined by scientist monkeys. They examine Taylor, who's wearing strange clothing. But two chimpanzees argue about the need to study the animal's brains, ignoring Taylor, who's still recovering from his throat wound and unable to speak. In the morning, Dr. Zyra does her rounds. She's intrigued by a strange animal she calls Bright Eyes because he pretends to talk in a hilariously convincing way. Taylor tries to demonstrate that he's intelligent and attempts to snatch the pencil from Zyra's hand. At that moment, Dr. Zaius enters. Zyra shows him the exceptional human, but Zaius is skeptical and sees him merely imitating. Zyra tries to draw attention to the human's uniqueness by highlighting his unconventional use of a blanket as clothing and his unusual hand movements. Perhaps he's intelligent, but Zaius is irritated, dismissing it all as cheap tricks. Humans are dangerous and must be destroyed. Later, they bring a female human as a gift and lock her in Taylor's cell. The next day, George and his companion are walking in the yard in a large cage. Zyra brings her fiancé, an archaeologist named Cornelius, to show him Taylor, but Cornelius sees nothing special about him. While the apes argue, George writes in the sand, but nobody pays attention to him. At that moment, Dr. Zaius arrives, annoyed at Zyra with her human again. Suddenly, a wild man attacks George and a fight breaks out. The guards drag Taylor away and Zaius sees the letters George wrote but quickly erases them. Zyra apologizes to Taylor, but he snatches the paper and pencil and writes his name on the piece of paper. Zyra is astonished and takes him home. Cornelius doesn't believe her stories. It's all just tricks. Humans can't write. They try to figure out where he learned it and Taylor writes the name of his school. The apes are shocked. Could he really be intelligent? The man explains that they came from another planet. Cornelius is puzzled, but flying is impossible. Then Taylor crafts a paper airplane. Afterwards, he asks to see the maps and explains where they landed and how they got there. Zyra and Cornelius argue fervently. She claims that humans are a mutation, the missing link between apes and monkeys, and it is quite possible that monkeys evolved from humans. Dr. Zaius, who enters the scene, discovers the paper airplane, crushes it, and orders the man to be taken to a cell. Taylor and Nova sleep in their cell when the arriving apes order Taylor to be prepared for a castration operation, but the man breaks free and runs out of the cell. He manages to hide in the ape temple but is noticed, and the man has to run through the ape city again. Taylor ends up in a museum where stuffed humans are exhibited. Shocked, he runs out into the street but gets caught in a net, where Zyra finds him. And then the voice returns to Taylor, shocking the apes. Later in the cell, Taylor tries to teach Nova how to speak, but the apes take the girl away and put her in the cell across from him. The man tells her about his life on Earth, but he didn't love anyone there. He wonders if Nova can love. The apes put a collar on him and take him to trial. A hearing is now taking place, and Zyra and Cornelius are ready to act as his attorneys. The judges are outraged. He has no rights because he's not an ape. But then what is he being tried for? The court gives a continuance to his lawyers, but Taylor intends to defend himself. A theologian scientist is called to testify, trying to prove the man's irrationality as he does not know the answers to the simplest questions. But Taylor cannot know them as he has not studied their culture. A person is prohibited from speaking, so he writes his statement and submits it to the court. Cornelius reads that Taylor is a space explorer and arrived from another planet, but the apes do not believe him. They demand to bring the people captured with him. And Taylor sees Landon, but he does not recognize his friend, and a scar is found on his head. George realizes that Dr. Zaius destroyed the man's brain. George is dragged back to the court. And then Cornelius defends Taylor. He did not lie when he said he came from the Forbidden Zone. He described it very accurately, and Cornelius himself was there, and he found traces of ancient ape culture. Zyra continues the defense. If he did not come from another planet, he was born on this one. She found no reason why people cannot speak. The problem is not in anatomy but in the brain, and that is the truth, but nobody wants to listen. Zyra and Cornelius are accused of scientific heresy and the tribunal is closed. The fate of the man is predetermined. He is handed over to Zaius, who intends to perform operations on him. George is outraged. How could such an upside-down civilization arise? And most importantly, why is Zaius so afraid of him? Zyra cannot accept this and organizes the escape of Taylor and Nova. Outside the city, Cornelius meets them with horses and supplies. He suggests returning to the spacecraft landing site. A small caravan sets off and reaches the river. If they follow it, they will reach the sea. Soon they reach the place where Cornelius was excavating. He is ready to take the man to the cave. And then Zyra sees the pursuit. Dr. Zayas, who caught up with the fugitives, is in for an unpleasant surprise. Taylor is armed. The Earthling offers a compromise to the doctor. If Cornelius can prove that their culture is not the oldest and originated from humans, he will leave them alone. Everyone goes into the cave. While Cornelius shows off his findings, Taylor discovers spare parts of a human, a dental plate, glasses, and a heart valve. But the main discovery is a human doll that says the word mama. Zayas tries to find a reasonable explanation when gunshots are heard outside. Everyone rushes to the exit. It's the makeshift doctors who, unable to keep their words, have attacked the fugitives' escorts. Taylor takes Dr. Zayas hostage and orders everyone to leave. Taylor will release him in exchange for a horse, food, and water for him and his woman. But before leaving, he asks the doctor why he always feared him, and he answers because he's a man, and that his ancestors are to blame for the lifeless forbidden lands, for he is the lowest and most treacherous beast. The people leave and the doctor orders the cave to be blown up and Zyra and Cornelius to be arrested. He saves the future of his people. Taylor and Nova ride along the beach. Suddenly, the man jumps off the horse in horror. He has returned, and they did it after all. They blew them all up and destroyed civilization, let them burn in hell. Nova looks at Taylor in fear. She doesn't understand what is before her, the upper part of the Statue of Liberty rising on the ocean shore. The film is based on the book by French writer Pierre Boulle, who considered his novel one of his least successful works and therefore had serious doubts about its success on the big screen. But in the end, the film ranked 350th on Empire's magazine's list of the 500 greatest films. The man opens his eyes in the middle of a lake with a red drone flying overhead. Visions of his family, spaceships, and shootouts flash before him. Finally gathering himself, the man swims towards the shore, accompanied by the drone, which he calls Ezra, to check his mental health. Suddenly cries for help echo from the lake, and another man, followed by a woman, appears. None of them remembers what happened to them. Fina recognizes the wreckage on the shore as the remnants of a warship called Karik, and Ezra recalls an invasion. Then the men discover the remnants of a car that must have been there for centuries. Apparently there used to be a road in this place. People remember the invasion, and it turns out they all died in different years. Moreover, Abram confesses that he is 67 years old, although he looks 25. According to the red drone, they were brought back to life in their prime years. Their memories are different because they died at different times. Around them is Earth, but 400 years after the extinction of humanity, destroyed by aliens. They were resurrected by creatures living in the water, called sparks. The ultimate goal is the revival of humanity, and the rest of the information can be found in the settlement where the others who have returned live. The drone orders Ezra to collect the sparks. Gathering their meager belongings, the people set off after the drone, trying to understand why the Kariks revived them. Soon they find partially destroyed arches, and Abram rushes to them, rejoicing in his young, strong body. On one of the structures, he sees unknown hieroglyphics and touches them. The man is thrown back, and he admits that he saw everything. Suddenly, the red drone is shot down, and a second shot wounds Abram. The trio runs behind a hill where Ezra, setting up an ambush, captures the pursuer. The man, named Jax, denies the existence of the settlement. The glowing substance on his neck is a skin rider, which is one with the human body. He needs the sparks, but Fina confidently demonstrates her proficiency with a weapon. Abram insists that when he touched the unknown symbols on the arch, he felt the vastness of outer space. But this elicits mockery from Jax, who suddenly frees himself and lunges at Ezra. However, Fina points his own weapon at him. This time they tie the man securely and leave, despite his claim to know Ezra's brother. Soon the team takes shelter in a cave, while others with glowing parasites on their necks are found, including Ezra's brother Silas. Meanwhile, the resurrected people in the cave discuss ways to recreate a human being and wonder where the aliens obtain the initial material. During the night, Abram's wound becomes inflamed. He is lowered into a small pond where the sparks are released. By morning, Abram emerges completely healthy. Fina discusses what happened to Ezra, as she doesn't understand why they chose her out of millions of great people. Soon the resurrected individuals see high walls of a settlement in the distance, but on their way, skin riders with glowing necks catch up to them. Ezra stays behind to delay the pursuit. He manages to do so for a while until he recognizes his brother Silas among them. In the meantime, Fina and Abram reach the settlement's walls, and just when it seems they are destined to be captured, the gates open. A yellow drone neutralizes the skin riders and lets the fugitives inside. It then flies after Ezra, carrying him through the air into the settlement where there's no one around. In response to all their questions, the drone invites them to follow and shows them rows of graves where the settlers rest. Later, the yellow drone opens the doors of an abandoned military base for the people where the previous settlers lived. In the forest, skin riders capture a man who escaped from them. Silas discovers that the glowing creature they call companions has inexplicably stopped functioning in Duncan's neck and promises to fix it. The resurrected individuals learn that the settlers died from a new virus that still spreads throughout the region. The yellow drone asks them to release the sparks into a vessel with water and learns from them that the sparks can create a vaccine if people bring the ingredients found in the living lake. Fina begins to bleed from her nose and she stays at the base while the men go to the lake. She takes on the task of repairing the damaged red drone. On their way, Ezra tries to understand how the system that brought them back to life works. The drone operates on sparks, but who controls the sparks is unknown. The men reach the lake and release the sparks into the water to collect the necessary ingredients. In the settlement, Ezra's wife Lynn suddenly appears before Fina. She explains that she worked as a nurse during the invasion and can offer help, but then disappears just as suddenly. On the lake's shore, Ezra confesses that one of the skin riders is his brother, meaning these people are also resurrected. He recalls the moment when he first saw the alien spaceship flying overhead and signaled to his brother that he was a worthless, spoiled child. Now he is determined to apologize and try to retrieve Silas. Meanwhile, a hologram of Lynn appears again to Fina, helping her repair the red drone. In the meantime, the yellow drone warns of the approaching skin riders. Ezra asks Abram to run while he himself tries to intercept his brother Silas. However, he gets surrounded and subdued. Regaining consciousness, he finds himself alone with his brother, who admits that he prohibited forcibly transforming him into a skin rider because he wants his brother to join them voluntarily. Each skin rider has a companion on their neck, which teaches the person how to behave correctly and telepathically connects them with others. Thanks to the companion, Silas is now the leader and mentor for the others, whereas in the previous world, he was nobody. Then Silas suddenly falls asleep, signaling Ezra to leave. Ezra meets Abram in the forest, to whom he explains his intention to save his brother. The men return to the lake, where the sparks have created 3 vaccine capsules for them. After consuming their doses, they bring the third one to Fina, whose condition worsens. Lynn asks the red drone to replace her image with someone dear to the girl, and Duncan appears next to Fina. Fina regains consciousness after her friends administer the vaccine. The next day, Abram finds a room that is blocked, revealing a glowing obelisk. Meanwhile, in the forest, Silas argues with Duncan about the purpose of the companion controlling the thoughts of the skin riders in the community because Silas believes it amounts to slavery. In the settlement, Abram learns to read hieroglyphs and understands that the unknown hosts offered to dig up weapons against the skin riders in the forest in exchange for more people for the settlement. Ezra goes to the forest for the excavation. Meanwhile, Silas brings Duncan to an open area where Jax conducts training fights, taunting regular people. Unexpectedly, Duncan defeats Jax. Silas stops the duel and explains that he tested his theory, revealing that humans react faster by a fraction of a second than skin riders. Currently, Duncan has a weak companion, so he makes decisions with just one brain, the human one. In contrast, skin riders with healthy companions have a signal that passes through 2 brains, the humans and the companions, causing a slight delay. The conclusion is that humans will always outperform them in combat. To gain an advantage over humans, Silas plans to perform brain surgery to reduce the signal delay. However, a working drone and a test subject are required for this. In the meantime, the yellow drone brings Ezra to the excavation site, which the skin riders immediately learn about. Ezra unearths an item that the yellow drone calls a weapon. In the settlement, Abram, upon touching the obelisk, suddenly realizes that he understands the meaning of the hieroglyphs on it. However, he doesn't yet grasp what this knowledge entails. In the forest, the yellow drone warns Ezra about the approaching skin riders. They attempt to flee, but the skin riders surround them and take the unearthed weapon. Unexpectedly, the weapon activates and kills one of the skin riders. Taking advantage of the chaos, Ezra scatters the rest and escapes. Meanwhile, Fina tries to find out from the red drone why the unknown beings are resurrecting humanity. She requests the revival of Duncan, unaware that he has already been resurrected and has become a skin rider. Ezra brings the weapon meant to eliminate skin riders to the obelisk, hoping it will help establish contact. However, he refuses to kill the innocent inhabitants until the obelisk explains who they are and what is happening. The drones controlled by the obelisk promise to resurrect Ezra's family if he obeys them in all matters. Ezra has no choice but to comply. Later that night, Fina goes to the obelisk, where she finds Ezra, who, like her, hopes for the return of loved ones. They notice that the weapon unearthed in the forest has opened. The obelisk issues new symbols, instructing Fina to go to the lake to receive new people. However, skin riders spot her on the way. As for Abram, the drone tells him about the structure of the glowing companion on the necks of the skin riders, which is tightly connected to the human brain through a crystalline structure. The weapon found in the forest destroys these crystals, eliminating the parasite. When a skin rider dies, its memory is preserved on the crystal, which is passed down to its ancestor. This is what needs to be found and destroyed. Fina sees Lynn emerging from the lake and helps her get ashore. When Jax appears on the shore, the red drone neutralizes him. The girls attempt to escape but are captured by Duncan, who seizes the red drone and fails to recognize Fina, his beloved from the past. The girls try to flee, but Lynn injures her leg and orders Fina to go to the settlement and fetch her husband. Lynn, on the other hand, falls into the hands of the skin riders, who return her to the lake. There, Jax shows how the sparks work, healing her injured leg. But suddenly a stone hits Jax's head, and an unknown little wild girl takes Lynn to her forest dwelling, providing her with shoes and food. However, it turns out the girl cannot speak. During this time, Fina reaches the base and informs Ezra about the resurrection of his wife, Lynn. Despite the yellow drone's warning that when skin riders take someone, it's forever, Ezra is determined to rescue her. Jax finds the little wild girl's home, but she has already taken Lynn away. They hide in the forest. At the same time, Ezra contemplates how to disable the force field since the obelisk prevents him from doing so, leaving him unable to leave the gates. Fina admits that she saw Duncan, who is also with the skin riders now, and he didn't recognize her. She fears the same will happen to Lynn. Meanwhile, in the forest, Jax tracks the runaways and explains that even the sparks make mistakes, resulting in flawed individuals. He is ready to destroy the little girl, but Lynn persuades him not to do it. At the same time, Silas extracts the crystal companion from the deceased skin rider's neck and instructs one of the women to take it to the ancestor. Then, they bring Lynn to him. As for Abram, while communicating with the obelisk, he suddenly surmises that he had lived in this settlement before, which is confirmed by a notebook he found with his own handwriting. Later, Fina speculates that they all have lived here before. The yellow drone confirms this fact and leads Abram to a graveyard where he shows everyone who is buried there, including Ezra's grave. It turns out that he had also been resurrected and lived in the settlement at one point. Then the yellow drone guides Abram to the next grave where he finds himself and encourages him to start a new life honorably. Fina demands that the man bind himself. He agrees but suddenly snatches a weapon from Fina and stuns the skin rider standing behind her. At the same time in the bunker, Abram is trying to find out from Yellow where the progenitor is located. However, she does not know, but Jax knows, and he heads to the bottomless lake, dives into it, and emerges in a cave. Meanwhile, Silas is trying to convince Ezra that life in his community is much better than in the bunker. Fina begins to trust Duncan and agrees with his plan. And in the camp, Lynn's escape is discovered. Duncan immediately receives a message about this from other skin riders and agrees with Fina's plan to send them on a false trail to enter the camp and save Ezra. The pursuit heads in another direction. Silas demonstrates to his brother the capabilities that a companion gives to the human body. He dips his hand into a vessel with sparks and explains that they cannot kill a companion as it goes against their principles. So if Ezra wants to kill the companion, he will have to kill the person. Fina and Duncan infiltrate the camp and seize the skin rider's weapons, and Jax reaches the ancestors' dwelling place. He asks them to explain how the drone works, and several human figures come out to him. Fina and Duncan find Lynn. The girl explains that after being infected by the parasite, she immediately plunged her hand into the sparks and it seems to have helped. Duncan asks the women to leave while he finds Ezra. The ancestors show Jax how the drone works. And in the bunker, Yellow confesses to Abram that not a human lies in one of the graves. Silas proves to Ezra that the obelisk is no better than a companion, as it also subjugates people. He lets slip that all of them, including his brother's wife and daughter, once lived in the settlement. Their conversation is interrupted by Duncan, who, under threat of arms, takes Ezra and leads the group to the settlement by a shortcut. But the protective barrier detecting a companion in Duncan does not let him pass, unlike Lynn. Then Fina ties his hands. But at that moment, the pursuit led by Silas bursts onto the clearing. Duncan pushes Fina behind the barrier, and they with Ezra prepare to fight. Abram runs to the obelisk, and it lets the men through on the condition that Duncan remains in the yard until they figure out how to free him from the parasite. At the same time, the ancestors express concern about Jax's hatred for humans, as they are much better carriers than Kariks, and they advise him to find a compromise. Meanwhile, Duncan confesses that his companion is still weak, but he is gaining strength. He remembers the settlers and confirms that Kylie is alive. Sparks rejuvenate people in the prime of life, but children at the age of their actual death. He also lost a wife and a child, and it was Fina, although the woman does not remember this. Abram explains that they are another generation of the revived. The first one lies in the graves, and they are them too. Jax reprograms the red drone, refusing everything human that was in its memory. Fina unties her husband, but when she falls asleep, Duncan's companion receives a signal from Silas, and he heads to the bunker. There, Abram confesses to Ezra that the drone showed him the memory of another woman he saw a year before the invasion. It feels like someone knew about the invasion and offered people help. He wants to consult with Yellow, but she is nowhere to be found. This happens because Duncan is just locking the drone behind one of the panels. Then he attacks Abram, knocks him out, and heads to the obelisk, despite his human side resisting it. He screams in frustration and Ezra hears him. He runs to him, but Duncan closes the doors and enters symbols that deactivate the force field. Realizing this, Ezra rushes to Fina, and they manage to barricade the bunker doors. Duncan's companion comes out in the open and confesses that all this was done for the sake of the weapon he hid. He is ready to reveal where Kylie is now if they hand over the bunker to the Skin Riders. The man is tied up. Outside, the sounds of banging are heard, Skin Riders trying to break down the door. Through Duncan, Silas offers to hand over the bunker. Then he will say where Ezra's daughter is now, because someone from the first settlement managed to avoid death from disease. A debate ensues, resulting in a decision to deactivate the parasite using Lynn's medical knowledge. Jax returns. He expresses his dissatisfaction to Silas, as he could have infected Ezra long ago, but lets him go. Silas cuts off the conversation and orders to continue working on the drone. At this time in the bunker, Lynn tries to figure out how the companion works, and it confesses that it can cause great pain to its master. Ezra and Abram conclude that the settlement existed for at least 10 years, and there must be survivors, otherwise, who buried the fallen. Moreover, Yellow said that a drone is buried in one of the graves. At that moment, the knocking at the door resumes. Ezra remembers that there is electricity in the bunker. Fina digests the cable, and a strong electric shock destroys one of the Skin Riders. At the same time, Abram finds Yellow. Simultaneously, people realize that Duncan is acting as a transmitter, and they move him to another room. As they part, Ezra asks to tell his brother that he loves and believes in him. This message puzzles Silas. Yellow scans Duncan and discovers that the parasite has affected all human organs, and even the sparks cannot save him. Abram tries to get answers from the obelisk. Moreover, Yellow said that Duncan was given access codes, but by whom? The man again remembers that woman in the hospital. She had a drone, sparks, and symbols of knowledge on her bracelet, so something was known before the invasion. At Ezra's request, Yellow shows the image of the woman, and he recognizes his mother Eleanor. Meanwhile, Silas prepares to continue breaking down the doors, but something leads him to the cemetery. Jax, following him, reminds him that he is not human and he should not care about the graves, so he intends to start silencing personalities from him. Silas is arrested. At this time in the bunker, Yellow confesses that Eleanor was one of the initiators of the revival of the human race. Duncan is not lying. Kylie was in the settlement, and only he can say where the survivors are now. Duncan's companion is knocked out with a tranquilizer, and the man is tied to a table. While the parasite sleeps, the man comes to and points on the map the direction the survivors went. He advises finding the wild girl and wakes up. after which Yellow finds the weapon he had hidden earlier. The people notice the silence outside and, opening the doors, kill the sentinels left by the skin riders. Making sure that there is no one else in the yard, Ezra and Lynn say goodbye to their friends and set out to find Kylie. Jax activates the drone, intending to remove the human personality from Silas, and learns about the presence of Ezra and Lynn in the forest. He sends the skin riders to follow the pair. Fina comes to Duncan and admits that she is ready to kill him to free her loved one. However, Yellow knocks him out. The man regains consciousness in the cemetery and is relieved, thinking that Fina could not bring herself to harm him. In fact, Yellow has injected a beacon into his body and now people can track his path. At this time, Ezra and Lynn find the wild girl and ask her to guide them to Kylie. Silas regains consciousness when the red drone informs him that he did the opposite, preserved his personality, and suppressed the parasite's capabilities. At the same time, Ezra and Lynn notice they are being followed and try to evade the skin riders. However, arrows fly from the rocks, the skin riders perish, and the survivors approach the people. Meanwhile, in the camp, Jax leaves Duncan on guard while he and his people follow Ezra and Lynn. They are then scanned for safety, and upon confirmation, the settlement leader Rowan leads them into the camp. She warns them that they do not truly know their daughter. They only remember her up to the age of 6, and they are merely copies of those who lived in the settlement. Abram and Fina dig up a broken drone from the grave, hoping to retrieve data from its memory. Rowan brings Ezra and Lynn to the hidden camp in the mountain caves. Noticing the strange expressions on people's faces, she explains that they both died defending the previous camp from an attack. If it weren't for Lynn, no one would have survived. Silas killed the woman. Fina connects Yellow to the memory of the broken drone, and she promises to show the events of the past. At the camp, Ezra and Lynn's adult daughter arrives. Although she understands what they feel, she refuses to recognize them as her parents. Red notices that Silas is experiencing severe pain. He flies to Duncan, and at that moment in the camp, a bloody Justin appears, who orders him to take the rest of the people and rush to the place where they were ambushed. He carries out the order, and Jax disappears because it was a hologram created by Red. Silas escapes. The real Jax finds the ambush site and orders a search of the rocks. In the bunker, Yellow transports Fina and Abram into a virtual reality of the past settlement where people go about their daily activities. Jax enters the gates and explains that Silas developed a growth on his neck, after which he attacked his friends. All this happened near the old Karrick ship. Returning to their reality, the people realize that this was the first case of companion infection. Yellow explains that the parasites create a structure similar to fungal spores. Silas likely inhaled them. The parasites themselves were brought by the Karricks, who were their carriers before humans. Meanwhile, a boy from the survivors, Thomas, carelessly falls into the hands of Justin. Silas begins to experience severe pain. Red tries to alleviate his condition and notices Duncan rushing towards the bunker. Apparently, he has discovered his escape and wants to detain Silas. Red leads him another way. At the same time, Thomas learns that he has been infected with the parasite. At the camp, his absence is noticed. Rowan calls a council and Ezra advises them to flee. If Thomas reveals the camp, they will not survive. Yellow shows how Abram proposed to create a virus capable of killing the parasite, although the idea itself belongs to the obelisk. People heatedly discuss this proposal, and many disagree. Lynn suggests splitting up. Those who take the virus should stay in the bunker, as they will be weakened. Rowan speaks against it. Abram realizes that he was the cause of the remaining deaths. In the caves, Ezra urges everyone to leave while he defends them. At this time, Silas reaches the bunker and sees Duncan sitting by a campfire. He lures him into the workshop and locks him in there. Abram is overwhelmed with guilt, runs to the obelisk, and voices his accusations. Suddenly, it creates the image of a second Abram, who says that on the other side of the obelisk are creators who sincerely believed they were saving the settlement. The virus just turned out to be slower than the parasite cells. The second Abram disappears as voices of Ezra and Lynn come from behind the doors. Fina opens the doors, and friends push Silas inside. They immediately disappear as they were holograms created by Red. Silas asks to be heard. The drone supports this request and reports that they cannot destroy the ancestor without Silas. At this point, the boy loses consciousness and they bring him inside. Ezra, Lynn, and the young archers set up an ambush, but Thomas appears, shoots at them, and wounds Kylie's fiancé, Nico. Ezra kills the boy and upon examining finds a parasite. Lifting his arrow, he realizes there is something on its tip. At that moment, Jax appears with his people and calls them to battle. Red puts Silas into a coma. Meanwhile, Lynn and Kylie bring the injured Nico inside. Justin orders his man to watch the backup entrance to the cave. Lynn starts treating Nico, but the worst part is that the arrow tip might have a parasite larva. The boy then demands to be killed, as Lynn herself set such rules. Duncan tries to call any of the skin riders for help, and Yellow explains to Fina and Abram that the parasite is killing Silas so that he cannot reveal the way to the progenitor. Then Red admits that he can link the minds of Abram and Silas, which might help reveal the secret. At this time, Kylie decides to help her father patrol. The girl recalls the past and calls Jax his best friend, which greatly surprises Ezra. And his urge to kill arises because the parasites are very afraid that the human inside might take over if he remembers his attachments. Father and daughter return to the cave, and Ezra proposes that his wife, daughter, and Nico take another road while he guards them. After heated arguments, they head to the second exit. Abram enters Silas's mind and finds himself in a church. It turns out that the boy's mind considers the church a sanctuary. Abram admits that Silas will no longer come to himself, and he himself describes the way to the lake of the progenitor. The parasites are interconnected precisely through it. It is the source of their energy, strength, and knowledge. Silas knows for sure humanity will not survive if the lake does not disappear. Ezra resorts to trickery, and Kylie kills a lurking skin rider. The father bids farewell to everyone and stays in the cave. At the same time, Abram and Fina develop a plan to destroy the progenitor. Yellow explains that the weapon consists of 3 parts. 2 of these are standalone weapons, capable of operating independently of each other. However, the top part is dangerous for humans themselves, so it is discarded. Only the lower part remains, which destroys the progenitor. But this part will not work without the middle, where a human personality must be placed. But the progenitor has studied all the skin riders in this world, so the chances of getting into it are slim. And then Abram realizes why Silas was needed. Later, Fina reflects on her promise to Duncan to kill him and free him from the parasite. Then, Yellow admits that her husband is in the workshop in the yard. The woman arms herself and heads to the yard, but just as she is ready to open the door to the workshop, a skin rider enters the yard and releases Duncan. Fina tries to stop the men, but Duncan reminds her that she cannot kill him and leaves. At this time, Abram comes to Silas again and explains that they need his help. Jax decides to attack, realizing that Ezra is the only defender of the camp. He orders his men to engage him while he himself follows the trail of Lynn, Kylie, and Nico. Nico is losing strength, and Lynn decides to make a stretcher, although the boy asks to just leave him. And Ezra sets up an ambush and one by one eliminates the skin riders, then follows the trail of his wife. Nico transforms and grabs Lynn by the throat. He is ready to kill the woman, but Kylie interferes. The boy's companion admits that the girl is very dear to him, but he cannot indulge the carrier's weaknesses, and when Nico raises his sword, Kylie shoots him. Ezra catches up with them, not knowing that Jax is monitoring their reunion, but he receives a message about Silas's betrayal, and Jax leaves. Silas asks Abram to wait for his death, take his crystal, and insert it into the weapon. Then he will be in the middle part and can help. Abram does not fully understand how it works, but thanks Silas. They say goodbye. Abram comes to his senses when Silas dies, and Jax catches up with Duncan and his men by the lake. After a dispute, he orders everyone to stay in ambush, and he and Duncan will dive to the progenitor. Meanwhile, Lynn and Ezra bury Nico and console their daughter. Simultaneously, Fina and Abram bury Silas. Later, the groups meet, unaware that a black drone is watching them, which takes off above the earth and heads for a spacecraft. Abram tells Ezra everything that happened with his brother and the plan to destroy the progenitor, but he does not want to endanger his family. Yellow vaccinates Kylie, explaining that the vaccine was made by Sparks. The girl tells Fina that Duncan became a skin rider after her death, and no one knows how it happened. At the same time, Abram admits that he no longer believes in the obelisk, but he believes in Silas and is ready to do everything to destroy the progenitor. He tells Ezra about the weapon's operation. A part of Silas will guide them inside, but what to do next, he doesn't know. Ezra laughs at such a plan, and his daughter hears this. Abram and Fina try to convince Ezra that this is why they were resurrected. Otherwise, humanity is doomed. but they cannot persuade him. Then Abram and Fina leave together. Ezra is tormented by guilt, although Lynn tries to remind him of his duty to his family. At this time, Kylie is reviewing the map to the progenitor's lake and secretly leaves the bunker. Red informs the parents that he cannot find the girl, and they, realizing where she has gone, rush after her. Meanwhile, Kylie catches up with Fina and Abram, and later Ezra and Lynn appear. Thus they all come together again, but at the lake itself, they fall into an ambush by the Skin Riders. A battle ensues in which the group of survivors wins, but Abram is seriously wounded. However, Kylie has Sparks with her, and she suggests releasing them into the lake. As they start doing this, Duncan emerges from the water and shoots Lynn and Kylie. Fina, under the cover of a shield, rushes to him, and they both disappear under the water. Ezra releases the Sparks and brings the wounded into the water. Then a wounded Fina emerges, saying she couldn't overcome Duncan. Ezra dives and finds a wounded Duncan, who has reverted to his true self before death. He apologizes and loses consciousness, and Ezra sees in front of him a glowing something with crystals and fits the lower part of the weapon onto one of them. Then he inserts Silas's little crystal into the middle part of the weapon and looks for the place where it needs to be placed. But then Jax appears. He has always hated his carrier and all humans, and he will not let the progenitor be destroyed. The men engage in combat, and just as Jax is about to win, the revived Duncan attacks him. Ezra finds the right crystal and fits the middle part of the weapon onto it, and suddenly finds himself in a room where he is met by Silas. The brother explains that they are inside the progenitor, and only he could create this home in this place. He is a Trojan horse from which destruction will enter the progenitor. Ezra picks up the box with the symbol of knowledge from his mother and realizes that it is a detonator. The brother says goodbye to him, and when Jax appears, they activate the bomb. Ezra finds himself in the cave where the progenitor is destroyed, to Jax's great sorrow. The man emerges and finds his loved ones healed. Their elation is washed by a black drone, which again heads to the spaceship, where it is met by Eleanor and Duncan. They realize that the deed is done and humanity has a chance. Despite some illogicality, the story is quite extraordinary. It's not about battles with aliens, as the Kareks are only briefly shown once in a flashback, and not about humans' attempts to cunningly escape the dictate of their rule. At the heart is the question of the value of a person, the preservation of which can lead to peace and the rebuilding of civilization. In a small provincial town in Pennsylvania, life flows peacefully and calmly. Milton Robinson, a 79-year-old widower and one of its citizens, leads the life of a simple retiree. He regularly attends town council meetings where he always raises the same issues about changing the town's slogan and installing an additional pedestrian crosswalk near his home. One summer morning, after presenting his proposals as usual, Milton heads home. He spends his day with his daily chores, has dinner, and goes to bed. In the morning, he waters his azaleas and feeds the birds. Later, his adult daughter Denise comes to help him with his monthly bills. There's no news from his elder son Tim, as he lives far away and rarely calls. After finishing their business, Denise goes to the restroom and finds a jar of peas there. She's concerned about her father's well-being, and even though Milton assures her he's fine, she suggests he see a neurologist for a checkup. After all, the man is quite old, and forgetfulness could be a sign of approaching dementia. However, Milton vehemently opposes seeing any doctors. Denise goes to work, leaving the old man alone with his beloved detective shows and a solitary dinner. One night he suddenly hears a commotion in his backyard, and going outside, he sees a flying saucer that has landed awkwardly. Milton calls the rescue service, but they remind him that joking with such a serious organization is a matter for the authorities. They no longer answer his calls, so he dials Denise's number, but she is unavailable. After a restless night, he heads to the town council meeting, where as always he talks about the slogan and the crosswalk. At night, the old man hears strange sounds from the backyard, goes out to see what else has happened, and finds an injured extraterrestrial being in his patio. Once again, he tries to reach his daughter, but Denise, as always, is unreachable. He leaves a voicemail and waits for a call, but it's all in vain. The next morning, as usual, he attends the meeting. His friend Sandy this time proposes a new project for interacting with the youth. She has put up posters around the town and would be delighted if someone came to listen to her stories and advice. She is eager to be part of the lives of lonely young people who need friends. When it's Milton's turn, he starts with the town's motto and the crosswalk as usual, but after that he talks about the UFO that ruined his flowers and broke the bird feeder. However, nobody believes him, considering it the ramblings of an elderly man. Two active retirees, Sandy and Joyce, advise Milton not to bring up this topic at the meeting anymore, or else no one will take the suggestions of the elderly townspeople seriously. Sandy suggests giving the old man a ride home and reminds him that she is always nearby and he can count on her help. Milton becomes angry, realizing that he is being taken for a lunatic. That evening, Milton checks his backyard again to see the extraterrestrial being whom he had thought was dead, but the creature suddenly raises its head and looks at him plaintively. Milton wraps the unconscious extraterrestrial in a blanket again and leaves a glass of water for it. In the morning, he finds the extraterrestrial wrapped in a blanket and seemingly shivering at his back door. Milton invites it inside since it's warmer in the house. He doesn't know what to do because he has never experienced anything like this before. The old man notices that the visitor has drunk all the water, so he brings another glass. Then he prepares a tray with various foods he finds in his house, but the extraterrestrial chooses only an apple. So, Milton goes to the store to buy apples, explaining to the cashier that it's for an extraterrestrial. The cashier treats him like a crazy person with delusions. Upon returning home, Milton sits on the couch in the living room and hears news about the search for a crashed weather satellite, but doesn't pay it much attention because he is startled by the sudden appearance of the extraterrestrial. Seeing that it's feeling much better and can even walk, the old man shows the extraterrestrial all the amenities and settles it in his home, providing a guest room and introducing it to television. Personally, he prefers detective shows because you never know how they will end. Milton shows photos of his family to the silent but attentive extraterrestrial. Unfortunately, his wife is no longer with them. His son has moved to California and his daughter visits him occasionally. Then the old man remembers the dance show and sits in front of the TV, inviting the extraterrestrial to join. On that day, the store clerk tells Denise about her father's strange statements about the extraterrestrial, and she goes to visit him during her lunch break. Milton meets her at the door, and as always, she insists on him seeing a doctor because she is very concerned about his mental health. Milton reluctantly agrees. Denise rushes off, and as soon as she leaves, the phone rings. It's Sandy, urgently needing a printer, and Milton invites her to come over and print the necessary documents. The woman arrives, and upon entering, sees the extraterrestrial. Milton introduces them to each other and shows the crash site. The woman is shocked, but tells Milton that they must keep this a secret for his own safety. She mentions how she has seen on TV how authorities treat poor extraterrestrials, and he shouldn't let anyone into his home except her. Sandy leaves, but Joyce has already noticed her car outside Milton's house and becomes curious about what's happening. Meanwhile, on TV, calls continue for the population to search for the crashed satellite. Time passes, and the extraterrestrial continues to stay in Milton's house, watching his favorite shows together. One morning, it brings Milton a piece of paper with a drawing of a cat on it. This touches Milton's heart, as the little one has drawn him a picture. He finds the extraterrestrial working on repairing its spaceship, apparently having fully recovered and getting ready to go back home. Soon, Milton visits a neurologist and undergoes tests, making some frustrating mistakes in some of them. During this time, Sandy stays with the extraterrestrial and complains to it about her daughter, who moved to the West Coast and lives with her friend. She is very upset that her daughter doesn't visit and doesn't bring her only grandchild. Meanwhile, the doctor, upon learning about Milton's forgetfulness and his stories about extraterrestrials, concludes that his abilities are deteriorating rapidly and suggests considering outside assistance for him. This greatly upsets Milton, and he angrily leaves after shouting at his daughter. Sandy, setting aside the children's book she was reading to the extraterrestrial, tries to ask questions, but the old man goes to his room. Later, he finds the extraterrestrial by its spaceship and complains about his daughter, who wants to put him in a nursing home. He hasn't been in touch with his son, and it seems he was a bad father. The extraterrestrial listens very attentively to the old man, putting down its tools. After this, Milton leaves a voicemail for his son, telling him about his life and Denise's affairs, hoping that he will find it interesting. The next day, Sandy brings a t-shirt for the extraterrestrial as she thinks it's uncomfortable for it to be naked. She also suggests giving it a name, Jules. Milton gets irritated by what he considers silly suggestions but eventually agrees with his friend. Meanwhile, Joyce, upon hearing about the government's offer of a reward for information about the crashed satellite, goes to Milton's house and looking through the window, sees the extraterrestrial. Now she is also in on Milton's secret and suggests naming the extraterrestrial Harry. Sandy suggests to Milton that he should acknowledge the fact that Joyce is joining their group, even though he's ready to kill the overly curious lady. Then she shows pictures of cats that Jules has drawn for him. Joyce speculates that Jules is trying to communicate something to the old man since all the drawings are of cats. However, Milton refuses to believe it. Meanwhile, the government receives numerous calls about various anomalies. One day, a woman complains about a man who spends hours staring at his rocket in the yard. FBI agents go to the given address but find a homemade rocket and a happy man next to it. At the same time, Joyce visits Milton to spend time with the extraterrestrial. She also gives it a t-shirt and offers it apples. During this time, Sandy receives a call from a young man who was interested in her posters. He comes to her house and the joyful woman invites him for tea. While Joyce talks to the extraterrestrial about her life in the big city, where she even performed in concerts because she sang well, Sandy engages in conversation with the guest and Joyce suggests singing for the extraterrestrial. While she does that, the young man asks for permission to use Sandy's restroom, but when she follows him upstairs, she sees him stealing her jewelry. After she threatens to call the police, the man attacks her and tries to strangle her. However, the extraterrestrial has a vision of the events and telepathically makes the man's head explode. This raises suspicions at the FBI, who are conducting the search for the crashed spaceship. Responding to police questions, Sandy suddenly realizes who saved her from certain death and rushes to Milton's house. She hugs Jules and tearfully thanks him for saving her life. The retirees discuss the potential danger of the extraterrestrial, but conclude that it's only dangerous to bad people. Meanwhile, the FBI agents can't understand how and from what the head of the criminal could have burst, so they decide to keep an eye on Sandy. On this day, Denise meets the elderly folks at the store and again brings up the topic of the apples Milton bought. However, Milton avoids the conversation. Later, the group has lunch at Milton's house when Sandy notices a strange smell. When they go outside, they discover a dead cat that Jules apparently brought there. Connecting all the facts, the retirees realize that the extraterrestrial needs cats for some reason, and now there are not 7, as in the picture, but 6. Milton calls Denise, hoping to find out where she disposes of the deceased cats in her clinic, which frightens her completely. Not receiving a clear answer, Milton and Sandy decide to drive around the streets of the town since cats often meet their fate under car wheels. On the road, Milton inquires about Sandy's husband's illness, which eventually led to his passing, and she talks about being left alone. She starts asking questions, reassuring that life must go on. However, at this point, Milton asks her to stop the car, and the FBI agents become witnesses as the elderly couple loads a deceased cat into the trunk. That day, they find 2 more cats, and Joyce promises to find the rest. Meanwhile, FBI agents eavesdrop on the private conversations of Milton's close ones and hear Denise telling her brother about her father's eccentricities. At this moment, Joyce brings 3 more cats she found in different parts of the town. Only one is missing. Just then, agents knock on the door, but the elderly folks hide and don't open it. The men eventually leave, and the people realize they need to act quickly. And then, Milton remembers Joyce's deaf, blind, and non-mobile cat. Offended, she leaves, but Sandy catches up with her and apologizes for Milton's bluntness. Joyce admits that he's right. It's long past time to end the suffering of the cat. She brings the animal, and the extraterrestrial puts it to eternal sleep. Then it covers the remains with some material, and they start to merge into a single object. In the end, a glowing object appears in front of the group, which serves as fuel for Jules's spaceship. The saucer lifts off into the air and moves to the center of the yard, which is instantly detected by the FBI's instruments. The retirees understand that the time for farewell has come. Joyce gives Jules a souvenir globe with a view of the city inside. Sandy gives him a sweater she knitted, and Milton gives him his driver's license with a photo. But the extraterrestrial suddenly makes an inviting gesture, clearly offering them to join, and Milton suddenly decides to accept the invitation. But then the phone rings in the house, and picking up the receiver he hears Denise's voice. She suggests meeting on Saturday. They'll have lunch and then she'll give him a haircut because they've been arguing, and that's not right. At that moment, agents knock on the door. Milton rushes into the yard, and they only manage to see the departing saucer, where 3 Earthlings joined in the last moment. The ship lands not far from the town to safely disembark the elderly and bid them a peaceful farewell. Milton hugs the extraterrestrial and thanks it for the invitation to travel together, but he can't leave his home and loved ones behind. Jules enters the spaceship and flies away while the elderly folks wave goodbye to him. Time passes. Milton continues to live in his home, visited by Sandy and Joyce. The elderly often reminisce about Jules Harry and hope that he hasn't forgotten them either. And one night, Milton's yard is illuminated by a bright light, and the old man realizes that he has guests. A light, heartwarming, and slightly melancholic film about the fading of human life. It's good that amid the plethora of recently produced nonsense, there are still such heartfelt and warm movies in which an extraterrestrial is not a villain who came to Earth to conquer it, but rather a cute and understanding silent being with expressive eyes. Spiderhead is an ultra-modern prison that resembles more of a hotel.
This is science, Jeff. We're making the world a better place.
In this facility, inmates live under a more relaxed regime, have the right to take walks, interact with each other, and have the opportunity to reduce their sentences and receive bonuses. But it all comes at a price. Spiderhead carries out medical trials, and not all of them are harmless. To be fair, it must be said that all experiments are voluntary, and each inmate has the right to refuse and return to a standard cell in another prison. Ray, one of the inmates, sits in a chair in front of a mirrored window, and Steve announces the start of the experiment by injecting a substance into Ray's bloodstream. Just a minute later, they administered the first dose of the drug to the subject and begin reciting simple jokes, causing Ray to burst into hysterical laughter. When the jokes are replaced by grim facts, the subject's reaction remains the same. Ray continues to laugh hysterically. Another morning in Spiderhead is no different from the previous ones. Inmates are awakened by a loudspeaker and their names immediately announced for participation in the experiments. Steve inquires of Jeff if he's willing to try the new N40 compound on himself, which no one has ever tried before, and the guy readily agrees to participate in the experiment. In addition to the test drug, another one is administered to enhance the speech centers of the brain. This allows Jeff to describe his state in great detail, mentioning the smallest details. Returning to the Spiderhead compound, Jeff meets Lizzie and tells her about his walk today. Unfortunately, he can't recount everything he saw because after taking the substance that enhances vocabulary, a side effect occurs. Jeff can't say even a few words. The only thing the guy remembers is that everything that surrounded him during the experiment, whether it was flowers or factory pipes, elicited the strongest feelings of love and admiration in him. In the evening, while sitting in bed, Jeff recalls how he ended up in prison. He and his friend decided to go for a joyride at the party, and the intoxicated Jeff took the wheel. The next day, the N40 trials, now called Cupid, continue, but this time Jeff is not alone. Heather, a bold girl who changes her mind about her partner after just a few seconds of drug administration, is invited to join him. The couple's conversation lasts only a few seconds before they cannot resist and engage in intimacy. They don't care that they're being observed and filmed, as the substance completely disconnects their minds from their internal barriers. The process concludes with the young people confessing their love for each other, which delights Steve, and he instructs his partner Mark to closely monitor the subjects to see how they behave when the effects of the substance wear off. The couple feels awkward after what happened and tries not to talk to anyone about it. Jeff continues to spend his free time with Lizzie, not telling her about what happened during the experiments, and he avoids encounters with Heather. The next day, they administered the same Cupid to Jeff, but this time in a double dose, and instead of Heather, an older woman is in the room, whom sober Jeff looks at with disgust. However, as soon as the substance enters his bloodstream, he engages in love with her. After this experiment, Jeff asks Mark to remove him from the kitchen where they work together with Lizzie because he feels uncomfortable continuing to interact with his girlfriend. Steve brings Jeff into the laboratory, but this time he's on the other side of the glass. Steve shows Jeff that both of his previous partners are in the experiment room. The supervisor offers Jeff the choice of which girl he is willing to administer the substance that induces intense fear and pain to, but Jeff cannot choose. He is indifferent to both of the girls and he cannot wish harm upon them. In the end, they simply release the girls, canceling the experiment. Having the right to another Friday walk, Jeff calls his girlfriend who was with him on the night of the accident, but once again he only gets the voicemail. In the evening, Jeff spends time with Lizzie, arranging a small Christmas surprise for her. When Jeff finds himself in the familiar chair in the laboratory, he sees Rogan in front of him, a massive inmate covered in tattoos. Jeff recalls everything that happened with the girls in the previous days and refuses the experiment. Nothing happens, and the men are simply released after a couple of minutes of silence. Jeff realizes what has just occurred. He and Rogan were partners with one of the female inmates, and she was supposed to choose which one of them would receive meds. Bursting into Steve's office, Jeff confirms his suspicions upon seeing Heather there. Furthermore, the doctor does not even argue with the inmate. On the contrary, he shows him a diagram of who is supposed to get close to whom under the influence of the drug. In response to Jeff's complaints, Steve reminds him that being in Spiderhead is a privilege, and if he's not satisfied, he can transfer to a regular prison, albeit without hope of early release. Understanding the hint, the next time Jeff sits calmly in the same room as Rogan without any hysterics. Steve sends Mark on a weekend break, advising his friend to enjoy his time on the mainland. Steve himself decides to take the Cupid to experience the ecstasy he had only seen in his subjects before. The experiments continue, and Steve warns Jeff that they will have to administer dark influx to the girls, as a certain committee demands the purity of the experiment. Jeff tries to explain that he does not wish for anyone to experience the effects of this substance regardless of his feelings for the girls. However, Steve remains adamant and reminds Jeff of all the privileges that he enjoys by cooperating with them. Not wanting to go back to a regular prison, Jeff agrees to administer dark influx to Heather. Heather begins to cry and panic, but the management calmly records the data, listening to Jeff's comments, which did not contain any hint of romantic feelings. The experiment's goal is achieved and Steve plans to conclude it, but an error occurs and Heather goes out of control. She gets hold of a sharp object and frees herself from the torment caused by the dark influx. While Steve and Mark are busy with Heather, Jeff notices the lost keys belonging to the supervisor and finds a notebook with records of upcoming experiments and a lottery ticket with the same numbers as the names of the meds being administered. Seeing that Steve is no longer behind the glass, Jeff manages to lock the safe and toss the keys back so that the doctor does not realize that his secret is exposed. Steve warns Mark that if anyone finds out about what happened to Heather and he has to answer for it, he will drag everyone who participated in the experiment down with him. Lizzie participates in the experiments for the first time, and the first thing they administer to her is dark influx. After experiencing it, she meets with Jeff in a secluded place and shares her feelings with him. Lizzie confesses that she's not sure if Spiderhead is better than a regular prison with the strictest regime. In turn, Jeff also opens up to his girlfriend and confesses that on the night of the accident there was not only his friend in the car but also his beloved girlfriend who did not survive the ride. That's why he willingly undergoes the trials on himself, hoping to somehow atone for his guilt. The candid conversation between the two of them leads to them spending the night together. Steve quickly deduces the close relationship between his wards and decides to use this connection for his own purposes. When Jeff arrives for the next experiment, he learns that today he must either agree to administer dark influx to Lizzie or leave Spiderhead. Jeff refuses, but the doctor gives him a chance to postpone the experiment until the morning. When he meets the defiant young man again, he is armed with Lizzie's personal file. It turns out that the crime for which the girl is serving time is so terrifying for her that no amount of dark influx can make it worse. Steve watches with pleasure as Jeff adjusts the dosage scale to the maximum. However, it quickly becomes apparent to him that Jeff intends to experiment on him, not on his girlfriend. Mark, realizing that he has also fallen into Steve's trap with the inmates, decides to rectify the situation and hands the remote control to Jeff. The inmate receives all the necessary information from Steve and persuades him to open the main exit so that he and Lizzie can leave the prison. But the manager grabs the remote control and administers the maximum dose of dark influx to the girl, causing her intense suffering. He then smashes his cell phone to prevent anyone from canceling his command. The couple manages to free themselves from the effects of the meds and run out of the laboratory. At the same time, Steve announces over the loudspeaker that because of the fugitives, everyone else will be sent back to prisons where their comfortable lives will come to an end. Jeff and Lizzie become the targets of a manhunt. Dozens of hardened criminals, including the massive tattooed Rogan, plan to deal with the couple who deprived them of all the privileges of the facility. Steve tries to escape with the meds because police boats called by Mark are about to approach Spiderhead. Steve manages to leave the base and take off in a small plane before the police arrive. But since his remote control is shattered, meds are injected into his bloodstream in massive quantities. Another release of Cupid induces admiration, and the man steers the plane towards a tiny rocky island, seeing it as a paradise. Mark, on the police boat, watches as his former boss circles above the sea and then crashes into the rocks. Jeff and Lizzie hijack a boat and manage to sail away before the police arrive. Happy and free, the young couple regrets only that Steve did not invent a substance that could induce self-forgiveness. And that's how the movie ends. After the alien invasion, humanity is forced to hide in underground bunkers. The world leaders of Earth are desperately trying to keep people underground. But there is a soldier who kills one of the enemies and discovers a terrible truth. But think shelter immediately. The nonsense could attack at any moment. 50 years after the attack of something, all of humanity lives underground, although there are those who refuse to descend into the bunkers. An ordinary person can return to the surface only by becoming a soldier and serving the standard term, 100 days. One day, a soldier with the call sign Sum-1 completes his required training and boards a tank to travel to the outpost Cerberus, where he must serve his shift. On the way, the military encounters people running towards the shelter, which is called Exilium. The soldiers disembark one by one as they reach their assigned posts. Finally, it's someone's turn. However, the soldier cannot immediately enter the bunker as the door is jammed, so he climbs the watchtower to contact the command. The soldier undergoes DNA identification and the system congratulates him on the start of his 100-day service. He will have to monitor the territory, track something, and send those who stray into the shelter. The protective ring is in order, there are no breaches, all cameras are functioning, and the power supply is stable. But upon arrival at the post, the soldier does not find the person he was supposed to replace, which is a breach of protocol. The commander reassures someone. The former watchman with the call sign VAX-7 was evacuated for medical reasons. He was called up from the reserves and now he must strictly adhere to all the rules. He must not leave his zone and must be very vigilant because his vigilance is a condition for survival of humanity. They provide him with a daily access code and instruct him on how to enter the bunker through a secret passage, allowing him to go outside for this purpose. Someone begins to settle in. Finally inside, he discovers that the room is neglected and empty. Someone arranges his rations, lights a cigarette and polishes a glass, listening to the system's reminders to think about the safety of himself and his family. At night, he dreams of laughing children, but the daily alarm clock reminds him of how many days are left until the end of his active service, and someone begins his daily routine. Exercises, showers, territory check, and food from his rations. During lunch, he suddenly hears strange sounds and sees movement in the corner of the room, but doesn't have time to understand what it is. Later, he reports everything to the commander, but the commander reassures him everything is proceeding as usual. At night, someone sees children playing again. In the morning, the routine of the previous day repeats: exercises, shower, food, and the one regulated cigarette. Every day is an exact copy of the previous one. There are 87 days left until the end of his service when someone manages to catch an unknown creature which turns out to be a white rat. However, the animal escapes without allowing itself to be properly examined. Immediately, there is a report of an attack by something on the refugees and there is no one left alive. Someone activates the system check and it reports that the defense lines are not damaged. But the soldier clearly sees movement in the bushes on the monitoring screen and reports it to the commander. The commander dismisses any intrusion and asks not to worry. There are 71 days left until the end of the term. The rat that someone named Doctor is no longer afraid of humans and he feeds it. One day there is an alert about a malfunction in one of the cameras and the soldier goes outside to perform technical maintenance on the security system. He surveys the outpost's territory, fixes the camera and finds a dead bird hanging from a tree with a token bearing his predecessor's number. Right away, the system alerts him to toxic emissions and the soldier heads towards the bunker. Upon returning to the bunker, he reports everything that happened at the post, including the discovery of the token, to the commander. But all his concerns are quickly dismissed. The commander assures him that Vax 7 simply fell ill and is now in the bunker, recovering. The commander's overly cheerful tone makes him doubt even more. There are 65 days left. The United Nations warns of danger, urging people not to stay on the surface as resistance against something is futile. One day, someone goes out onto the territory once again, and after a warning about toxic emissions, he notices an unfamiliar creature in the depths of the forest that quickly escapes from him. He reports it again, but the defense ring is intact and there is no cause for alarm. Someone decides to investigate the bunker and finds a blood stain on the wall, leading him to suspect that Vax 7 may have shot himself and was never evacuated. The soldier tries to access the video camera recordings from the closet where it happened, but the system denies him access. So someone decides to break into the locker belonging to Vax 7 and discovers a sketchbook and a radio receiver. Among the drawings, he finds a sketch of his own post, Cerberus, and a neighboring post, Graham, sparking his interest. There are 54 days left until the end of his term. Someone increasingly thinks about the neighboring post and one day decides to go to Graham to try to establish contact. However, he finds that he cannot cross the perimeter because an implant in his leg activates pain with any attempt to leave the ring. The audio commands insistently urge him to return to Cerberus. He decides to take a step back and climb a tree, hoping to establish contact by waving his hand and shouting to Graham, but he receives no response. Returning to his post, he reviews the archive files and suddenly he discovers some creature on the internal camera and the electricity goes out. Behind him, the soldier distinctly feels someone's movement, even though the equipment insists that there is no intrusion. Someone rushes outside and even shoots at the bushes, scaring off a bird. He reports the malfunction to the commander, who promises to send a repairman and reminds him of his duty, especially with only 40 days left. Someone tries once again to access the archive but finds it impossible as the data has been lost due to an electrical surge. The next day starts as usual, but suddenly the soldier feels unwell. He takes medication and accidentally cuts his finger when he suddenly hears a cheerful children's song coming from the predecessor's closet. It turns out that Vax 7's radio is turned on and the neighbor from Graham Post is calling out to his old acquaintance. He quickly realizes that it's a different person and cuts the conversation short, despite pleas to talk to him. The electricity surges again and the soldier reminds about the specialist. The commander then tells him about an attack on a post where no one survived, so reaching distant outposts is very risky. Several more days pass. Someone starts going outside more often, and one day he discovers a woman and a child hiding from him in a cave. He tries to convince them to come down to the bunker, but the two of them run away, seemingly more afraid of him than of something. Returning inside, he hears a warning about several lost individuals in danger. However, now the soldier is not sure if they want to be saved. He talks to the rat more and more, telling it about the children in his dreams. It turns out that the ability to dream has become a thing of the past, but he has suddenly acquired it. This is seen as a sign of a mental illness. Someone keeps trying to contact his neighbor, but there is no response. One night, the soldier ventures out into the territory and kills a huge deer, which he dissects and eagerly consumes. He behaves more and more like a wild man, shooting at targets and walking without his helmet. One day, he makes another attempt to contact Graham, sending a signal with a mirror, but still receives no response, which infuriates him. On his way back, he enters a zone of toxic emissions and almost loses consciousness. In a semi-delirious state, he sees the strange creature again, which runs away from him. Regaining his senses, he tries to convey to his neighbor his belief that VAX 7 is likely being held in the forest, but Graham remains silent. There are 14 days left until the end of his shift when a repairman finally arrives at the post. He reports on a recent attack and the deaths of many people. The man is displeased, sensing the presence of the rat. He explains that the soldier's predecessor was friends with the rat, considering it the height of foolishness. The technician dispels someone's fears, explaining that the shadow on the wall is himself due to a system glitch. Strangely, the cameras in the defense ring are turned off, even though the soldier checked them just now. Then the rat climbs onto the table, and upon seeing it, the repairman forcefully shoves it away. The soldier rushes to the motionless rat and pleads with it not to die, which infuriates the repairman even further. The soldier aims his gun at the repairman, ordering him to disable the internal camera and unlock the archive video recordings. The repairman refuses and someone hits him. However, he still can't do anything because the access requires the personal codes of 2 guards. A fight erupts between the 2 men. Someone sustains several injuries but eventually emerges victorious. Afterward, the repairman shares his experience of encountering something. When he was a soldier, his helicopter crashed in the desert. Of all the survivors, only he and his partner remained. The repairman went for help, and when he returned, he found the second soldier without ears. It turns out that something affects people through sound, and the guy cut off his own ears to avoid hearing the horrifying noise. During a sandstorm, they saw a huge shadow circling around them, but they never understood what it was. When he was eventually found, his lungs were filled with sand, and he had an unexplained catheter in his throat. The soldier locks the repairman in the bunker, tends to his wounds, and reports to the commander that everything is in order. Afterward, he figures out that he can access his predecessor's information through his radio. Finally, he manages to open the archive footage, which makes it clear that VAX 7 did indeed go insane due to exhaustion and stress. Someone shares this information with his neighbor. The soldier is overwhelmed with conspiracy theories. He is convinced that the leadership is deceiving the common people by inventing something, as no one has actually seen it. The mission to send people underground is a ploy to restrict the consumption of dwindling natural resources while the rich and powerful enjoy the leftovers. He requests a meeting with his neighbor, who reluctantly agrees. There are 7 days left when, upon hearing another system announcement about something attacking, someone flies into a rage and smashes the alarm with the jar into which the rat has just climbed. Realizing that he killed his own friend, he walks outside naked and once again encounters the monstrous creature. Extracting a pair of deer antlers from a tree, he mortally wounds the monster, only to recognize VAX 7 by a tattoo on his neck. He returns to release the repairman and tells him about the conspiracy, convinced that it was his predecessor's tales that drove him mad. But no one will deceive someone anymore because he's no longer afraid. The soldier demands to know where the power can be cut off because he intends to save the people by disabling the defense lines. The repairman is horrified. He will doom humanity, but he obeys the madman. Someone contacts his neighbor and informs him of his decision that he is coming to him. It's time to put an end to the madness that keeps people on the ground and make them free. One day, oceanographer Tom's family, his wife Julia and 2 children, Cassie and Ben, set off on a yacht trip in the Caribbean Sea. While Tom and Ben are busy fishing and Cassie is absorbed in her gadget, Julia goes for a swim. Suddenly, something unsettles her. Julia looks around, but the sea remains as calm as ever. However, she feels a distinct sense of dread, as though something large and dangerous is circling around. At the same time, the instruments on the yacht start acting strangely, but Tom, preoccupied with fishing, pays no attention to them. Meanwhile, Julia feels worse and eventually begins to drown. She screams, but the family doesn't hear her. The water seems to shift and pull her farther from the yacht. As the situation becomes critical, Tom finally hears her voice. He rushes to the helm, and the yacht moves toward the distant Julia. Tom dives into the water. With the children's help, they pull her aboard and revive her. Tom is angry, as he always asks that swimmers notify the others when going into the water. Julia apologizes and the incident is soon forgotten. Besides, the family has a reason to celebrate. Today is their son Ben's 13th birthday. Tom lights the candles on the cake and everyone congratulates Ben, who receives gifts, while Cassie takes a group photo of the happy family. At that moment, Cassie's boyfriend calls her. He asks her about the swim, but suddenly a sudden and intense storm begins in the background. Cassie is worried, but her boyfriend reassures her that he's safe. The connection cuts off. Cassie tells her parents about the storm on land, but then everyone feels some jolts, rushes to the deck, and sees massive whale carcasses surfacing around the yacht. Tom explains that sometimes whales get disoriented during storms, but these animals are pushing the yacht, threatening their safety. Tom dives into the water and soon returns aboard, injured. While trying to figure out what's going on, he cut himself on the propeller. Julia stitches up the cut on her husband's shoulder, and he explains that the yacht's shafts seem bent, likely from a tail strike. Now they're unlikely to be able to sail away. Later, Cassie tries to re-establish communication, but there's no signal. The radio isn't picking up any signals either. Tom begins calculating their supplies. There's enough water for about 4 days, no more, but they're on a shipping route, so someone is bound to find them. However, ominous sounds come from outside, and when the family steps out onto the deck, they see glowing objects falling from the sky. They fall closer and closer, and Tom, taking a risk, starts the engine. He manages to steer the yacht away from the next meteorite, but the engine is finally damaged. The next object falls so close that the family can see they are artificial satellites of Earth. A strong wind starts blowing, and the instruments go haywire. The terrified family hides inside the yacht, which is being tossed by the waves. They put on life jackets and prepare for the worst when a strange, ringing sound is heard, causing nosebleeds and nausea. Tom tries to signal for help with a flare gun, but it's all in vain. The family barely survives the night. In the morning, they were relieved to find themselves alive, but there's a gaping hole in the side of the yacht, and it's unclear why they're still afloat. The family goes outside and freezes in amazement. The water is gone, and their boat is standing on a rocky outcrop in the middle of a stony desert where the ocean once was. Sometime later, Tom tries to reassure his family, saying that not everyone could have perished. He takes measurements and realizes that the compass is lying. North isn't where it's supposed to be. This means the Earth's poles have shifted. Such a thing has happened on Earth before, but a long time ago. It turns out that the sea has retreated to where the land used to be, and most likely humanity has perished. Cassie can't bear this revelation and runs to the cabin, asking to be left alone. Julia goes to inventory the remaining supplies, while Ben releases a bunch of colorful balloons into the sky, hoping survivors will come to their aid. Meanwhile, Tom turns on the radio, sending out distress signals. Unexpectedly, he hears a response. It's from Naoto, the captain of a small submersible. They were deep underwater when the catastrophe happened, and that's why they survived. However, all communication systems have failed, and expecting help is futile. According to his calculations, the sea will return in about a week, and it will be harsh, so the man advises them to find higher ground and stay there. Julia orders the children to pack their things. Tom directly asks the captain if he can save their children. Naoto explains that the submersible is very small. Unfortunately, Naoto's partner died, and he can only take one person. After some persuasion, Tom convinces Naoto to take both children, and he provides his coordinates. Tom charts a course on the nautical map and promises to reach the location in a couple of days. The next morning, the family is almost ready to embark on their journey. Tom steps onto the deck and suddenly sees a man with a dog approaching. He walks toward him and greets him, but notices that the man is injured. He offers the traveler some water. The man drinks it and then suddenly punches Tom in the face, which Julia sees. She rushes to her husband as the traveler plunges a makeshift spear into Tom's chest. The dog keeps Julia at bay, though she freezes in horror herself. Realizing there's no saving her husband, she runs to the yacht. The man pursues her, injuring her arm. Nevertheless, Julia climbs onto the deck, and the children, hearing her screams, run to her aid. Together, they barricade the doors to the cabin. After that, Julia hides Cassie and Ben in a locker, giving her daughter the flare gun and instructing her to shoot only as a last resort. Meanwhile, the killer tries to break down the doors and eventually succeeds. Julia hides in the bathroom, patching up her wound. Entering, the intruder heads straight to the galley and grabs some food. It's clear that he's very hungry. Holding a can of food, the man begins searching the yacht while Julia arms herself with a kitchen knife. He enters the cabin, but the woman jumps overboard, hiding beneath the yacht. The killer peers through the hole but doesn't see her. However, the dog attacks Julia, forcing her to kill it. The man hears the yelp, goes outside, and finds the dog's body. Meanwhile, Julia climbs back onto the yacht through the portholes on the opposite side. She falls straight into the killer's hands. He beats her, throws her onto a couch, and grabs her throat, intending to strangle her. Cassie witnesses all this and realizes it's the last resort. She opens the locker and fires at the man. The shot throws him to the side, but the flare sets the yacht on fire. Julia orders the children to flee while she sneaks into the galley. The killer, only injured, tries to attack again. Julia kicks him away, grabs the packed bags, and jumps overboard, where Ben finds his father's body. Cassie runs to the corpse and sobs over it. Julia kisses her deceased husband, but seeing the killer leap from the burning yacht, she takes the children and leaves. The boat explodes behind them. The family runs across the stony desert and soon takes shelter in a rocky canyon, where a stream flows. However, the water is salty and undrinkable. Cassie shares a small amount of water with her brother, but he refuses to drink. The boy feels guilty, believing the killer came because he saw the balloons. Cassie also voices this thought, but Julia orders her to stop and defends her son, explaining that he didn't mean any harm. She tells the children to gather themselves, as a long journey awaits. And then she spots the killer again, still relentlessly following their trail. The family hurries onward. That evening, Ben finds the carcass of a hammerhead shark and tries to butcher it. But Julia sees the pursuer and orders the children to run. They soon come across a field of once flooded toxic waste barrels, but Julia urges the children forward despite the threat of contamination, knowing the killer is still on their heels. The family walks along the former ocean floor, weaving through piles of plastic and other trash dumped by humans. Soon, Julia notices that Ben is severely dehydrated and gives him the last drops of water. Cassie has a breakdown, convinced that they have no chance of survival, but Julia commands them to keep moving. Eventually, they find the fuselage of a plane that crashed into the sea long ago and crawl inside to rest. Julia examines the last photo of their family and recounts the story of her first meeting with Tom, which happened at her hospital, where Tom was brought with decompression sickness after a failed dive. The children weep, remembering their father and saying their final goodbyes to him. At night, Cassie is awakened by a noise and steps outside to sit near the plane. Out of the darkness, the killer approaches her, unaware that the girl is acting as bait. As he prepares to grab her, Julia ambushes him, stabbing the man with a knife. At dawn, the family prepares to continue their journey, only to discover the killer's body has been scavenged. A sign that something even more dangerous than humans lurks in the desert. They move on. Julia consults the map when Ben suddenly rushes ahead. His mother yells for him to stop, but the boy sprints toward a salty puddle and manages to drink a few gulps. Julia drags him away, but the boy becomes sick. Soon they come across some plastic chairs and build a makeshift shelter from the sun, resting inside it. Suddenly, Julia hears strange sounds. She steps outside and sees something that forces her to wake the children. Realizing the new danger, they begin running. Soon they spot a large ship in the distance, surrounded by crashed containers and a few wandering people. Julia calls out to them, but they, seeing thousands of giant crabs, dash into a container and lock the doors, ignoring her pleas for help. The three climb onto a container, though the crabs manage to wound Julia in the leg. Nevertheless, Julia, Cassie, and Ben sit on top, watching the crabs penetrate through a crack in the doors, killing everyone inside despite the people's attempts to fend them off. Julia ties a scarf around her leg and passes out. The next morning, she wakes up alone, terrified, and calls for the children. But it turns out the crabs have moved on, and the children had gone down to search for food and weapons. Julia cauterizes her wound while Ben examines the found weapons. Searching through the containers, they find a small amount of food and water. In the pocket of one of the deceased, Julia finds a radio and contacts Naoto. He responds, explaining that he was also attacked by deep-sea arthropods. Based on his observations, the sea will return soon, which is why the creatures have emerged. Julia begs him to save her children, but she's unsure where to go because she's lost the map. Naoto fires a flare. Ben sees the direction, and the family rushes toward it. Soon they see a yellow submarine in the distance, but reaching it is difficult due to the terrain of the former seabed. Cassie dislikes her mother's talk about saving the children, but Julia refuses to answer and pushes the family onward. They are forced to pass through a canyon contaminated with toxic waste. At one point they are caught in a rock slide, and Julia becomes separated from the children. She orders them to continue, and when Cassie refuses, Julia pleads with her to save her brother. Cassie and Ben make it out of the canyon and reach the submarine, but inside, there's no one. Suddenly, Naoto, badly wounded, emerges from behind the boat. He admits that he has no chance of surviving and orders them to climb aboard, but Cassie goes back for her mother, who is fending off the emerging crabs. Her bullets nearly depleted, Cassie climbs the rock barrier and extends her hand to her mother. They manage to reach the submarine just as the crabs overrun Naoto, who dies in their claws. The family climbs aboard, and just then an ocean wave crests over the horizon. The water lifts the submarine and drags it across the rocks, and as Julia watches everything that happened over the past few days flash before her eyes, she passes out. When she awakens, she finds the vessel at a standstill. Julia opens the hatch, and the family emerges to find themselves in a ruined city, carried there by the wave. Despite a great concept, the film failed to make an impact, largely due to the many mistakes made by its creators. Many years ago, humanity did indeed colonize Mars, where cities and villages were built, and Nikolai established a whole farm where he operates with his family and helper robots. However, the grasping hands of the oligarchy reached even to the Red Planet. In the year 2085, a young man named Konstantin is preoccupied with wealth and readily takes on any projects promising profit. His friend, Nikolai, bets on intelligence. Konstantin passionately invents a device that will help translocate consciousness, which he aptly names the Translocator. Konstantin immediately comes up with a catchy slogan for selling the device, but Nikolai tempers his friend's enthusiasm, as it's not even clear if this translocator works. So, Konstantin promises to bring a rat for an experiment, but instead brings a man named Vitaly, who is willing to swap consciousness with a dog, as it could be a ticket back home. His wife loves dogs. Nikolai refuses to conduct experiments on a human, even though Konstantin has already paid the man with money borrowed from his mother. Now he desperately needs results. Therefore, Konstantin conducts the experiment himself. Nikolai arrives when the man is already convulsing inside the device's force field. He tries to turn off the device, but at that moment it shuts down on its own because the transference is complete. However, the test subject makes no sound, and the frightened men attempt to get confirmation of the experiment's success from the dog. But the dog remains silent, while Vitaly speaks up, signaling a failure. The two men react differently to the failure. Konstantin is ashamed that at the age of 25, he's still asking for money from his mother. Meanwhile, Nikolai suggests starting a company with the slogan, "A robot in every home," and producing affordable helpers for every citizen. And if that doesn't work out, he plans to buy land on Mars and establish a farm there. 15 years later, Nikolai enjoys family life on Mars and manages his robotic farm. He films reports about his farm, showcasing the dairy products he's obtained through hard work, and introduces his helpers, robots, Galasha, Stepan, and Valera. The sentient tractor, Mitya, gets upset with his forgetful owner, but Nikolai quickly rectifies the situation and waves at him. Nikolai also has a favorite hobby, breeding copters, which greatly annoys his wife Nadezhda, as he spends a lot of money on his pastime. After deflecting her complaints by claiming he's shooting a promotional video, Nikolai shows his subscribers a drink made from tea fungus and introduces his eldest daughter, Marina, who is not enthusiastic about farm life at all. And after that, Nikolai presents his younger daughter, Lyudmila, who is passionate about constructing cyber weather installations in the form of Russian birches. There are 4 such birches controlling the weather in the entire region, which the girl enthusiastically demonstrates to the audience. Afterwards, the guy settles into his cyber bread box and flies to the landfill, which is regularly replenished with waste from Earth. There, he accidentally finds a discarded but fully functional robot. His wife, Nadezhda, is angry with her husband for bringing all sorts of junk into the house. However, he plans to name the discovery Vova and integrate it into their household, to which accommodating Nadezhda reluctantly agrees, but she prefers to call the robot Vanya. In conclusion, Nikolai invites good people to come to Mars, build, develop, and enjoy life, a sentiment echoed by his entire family. However, while relaxing in the evening amidst the idyllic Russian natural landscape, Nadezhda has serious doubts that anyone will heed their call. Meanwhile, the CEO of a major corporation, Konstantin Baragozin, is indulging in some pool time while contemplating his portrait on the moon when he is informed about the arrival of shareholders. Irritated, he wonders why his assistant Pavel couldn't come up with some excuse. However, Pavel has already exhausted all the reasons Konstantin could use to decline the meeting. At that moment, a button pops off from the CEO's jacket, right in the hands of a robot, who is promptly discarded. Konstantin angrily insults the shareholders who have just entered his office, and they begin to ask uncomfortable questions. Failing to provide clear answers, he is threatened with a change in leadership. He reminds them that Izhevsk Dynamics is his brainchild, and it was he who came up with the slogan about robots in every home. To this, they respond that the controlling stake of shares is in their hands. Konstantin urgently needs to come up with something positive, which he passes on to his assistant. Unable to think of anything better, Pavel announces the construction of a new factory on Mars. The shareholders like the idea, and Konstantin is given 1 month to execute it. In turn, he delegates the task of starting construction to Pavel. However, it turns out that the eccentric person who built the farm in the right location refuses to sell it for any amount of money. Konstantin orders that this stubborn person be shown to him and is surprised to see his childhood friend, Nikolai. Meanwhile, on Mars, a new day begins. Lyudmila sifts through the old remnants of her father's inventions and finds the translocator, but Nikolai brushes off her questions because they have a more interesting task at hand: activating the new robot. When turned on, it starts searching for a rag to perform the task of floor cleaning. At that moment, spaceships land on the farm, and from the largest one emerges a delegation led by Konstantin, who rushes to embrace his old friend. However, Nikolai isn't particularly thrilled with the guests. Konstantin is amazed by the abundance of goats, which have long been extinct on Earth. But Nikolai doesn't want to talk about his achievements because he's deeply resentful of Konstantin's underhanded takeover of their joint company. Konstantin suggests putting the past behind them and offers a huge sum of money, enough for Nikolai to settle anywhere, even on Jupiter's moon, Europa. For this suggestion, he immediately receives a punch in the face. Enraged, the director signals his assistant to read out a decree declaring the corporation as the owner of Mars, and the demolition of the farm buildings begins immediately. This is when Nadezhda steps into the fray, but Konstantin's henchmen grab the family and lock them in a hangar. Suddenly, the man realizes that the robot Vanya is missing and sees that it is still carrying out its task. Nikolai outwits the guards and escapes from the hangar, while Konstantin's assistant tries to persuade his boss to be more lenient, since evicting people from their homes is illegal. For this, he promptly loses his job. Meanwhile, Konstantin finds a sink and starts washing up, taking off his expensive jacket, which the robot Vanya promptly mistakes for a rag and adapts it to clean the floor. An infuriated Konstantin runs after the robot, but at that moment, the workers dismantle the farm's generators, and Nikolai, who has rushed into the barn, shoves his former friend, causing him to land precisely in the translocator chair. The device activates. When it all ends, Nikolai tries to activate Vanya, but it suddenly starts speaking with Konstantin's intonation and threatens to destroy the entire farm. Seeing the man's body, the robot begins to scream, realizing that its consciousness has ended up in Vanya's body. Nikolai is pleased that the translocator works, and the robot becomes angry, demanding to be returned. Meanwhile, Konstantin's body begins to behave erratically, which his assistant notices. Pavel orders that the suffering CEO be taken away, pushing aside the annoying piece of machinery. Nikolai sees Konstantin being loaded onto a spaceship, where his family is, and rushes after them, but the spaceship takes off, leaving Nikolai and Vanya with the CEO's consciousness in an iron head. At night, Nikolai fixes his car, all while enduring Konstantin's reproaches, who demands that the man urgently take him back to Earth, for which they need to reach the train station. Nikolai scolds the inept CEO, who then sets off on foot but gets stuck in Martian sand. In the morning, Nikolai finds him, and upon hearing his promise not to interfere with the farm, digs out the robot and drives it to the train station, encountering a Martian sandstorm along the way. Meanwhile, Konstantin's assistant returns home, where he is greeted by his wife and children. He has to admit that he got fired. Galina reminds him that their family is drowning in subscriptions, for the apartment, for the car, for the new renovation. They'll have to give up Italian wallpaper and designer furniture. And tomorrow, their subscription for the refrigerator expires. Maybe they should ask Baragozin for leniency. After all, it's all for the family. Meanwhile on Mars, Nikolai frees himself from the sand-covered car and locates Vanya's head by his voice. Searching further, he finds Vanya's body, which he has to catch up to. After assembling the robot, he digs out the car, and Vanya confesses that the train they're rushing to is the last one, because nobody should know about the construction of the new factory. Finally, the couple manages to pull out the car, but it refuses to start, so Nikolai forces Vanya to apologize to the supposedly offended car, laughing at the absurdity. After that, the car starts and speeds towards the train station. At the same time, Pavel arrives at the office and sees damaged robots, scattered belongings, and an incoherent CEO who makes him eat soap. He calls a doctor who gives a startling diagnosis. Baragozin's memories and personality have been erased, and his level of development is that of a 1-year-old child. Meanwhile, Nikolai's car approaches the city of Marsyansk when an elderly woman flags them down, asking for a ride to the train station. The old lady takes a liking to Vanya, reminiscing about her own robot, Grishka. She had sold her land to Baragozin's company, received a gift, and got a train ticket. Nikolai asks the old lady to share her thoughts about the oligarch, because he can convey people's opinions to him. The elderly lady begins to express her desires, which Vanya has to confirm. Finally, the group arrives at the train station. Nikolai says goodbye to the car and sends it home. The people and the robot then board an interorbital elevator and ascend to the platforms. However, there are no tickets left for the train to Earth. Nikolai tries to negotiate with the conductor when Vanya notices a ticket with the elderly fellow passenger. Meanwhile, on Earth, Galina seeks details about the incident from her husband. It turns out that Baragozin won't start speaking and thinking somewhat normally for at least a year or two. She advises her husband not to tell anyone anything and to become the leader of the corporation and to raise a good person out of the former CEO. Pavel disagrees and the woman speaks, and he pauses her. He works to fulfill all her wishes, but she's putting pressure on him. However, in reality, she's just a hologram, just like the children she made him subscribe to, even though they don't even resemble him. After expressing all his grievances, the man unpauses Galina, who, upon realizing that he had paused her, becomes furious with accusations, as he doesn't even understand what it's like. She's not doing it for herself but wants to make him successful and wealthy. He deserves it, after all. Pavel asks her to reduce the vanilla quotes option, and the hologram complies with his wishes but continues to pressure her husband. Meanwhile, Vanya brings a ticket to Nikolai, and the couple boards the train. But then, the man sees the elderly lady from earlier outside the window who can't find her ticket, and realizes where the robot got it. Vanya, pretending to be Konstantin, promises to send a shuttle for the old lady when they reach Earth, but Nikolai knows the true value of his promises. He demands that the robot apologize, return the ticket, and put the grandmother on the train. Vanya literally tosses the old lady into a moving car when the grandmother standing on the platform addresses them. It turns out that Vanya put a completely different grandmother in the car. Nikolai sends Vanya to catch up with the train and remove the wrong grandmother, while he helps the actual traveler catch up with the car. But the grandmother activates the rocket engine on her suitcase trolley and catches up with the train herself. The train departs. Vanya expresses everything he thinks about Nikolai's softness, which caused their separation in the first place. Then Nikolai switches Vanya to vacuum cleaner mode, and it starts cleaning the platform, threatening Nikolai with dire consequences when it returns to its body. Vanya finds a space mail ticket. Nikolai has an epiphany. The couple heads to the post office. At the same time, Pavel is getting ready to sleep in Baragozin's residence when Galina reminds him of certain options that were not available to them. Nikolai and Vanya set out on their journey to Earth in a postal box, but there's a mix-up at the sorting, and the package veers off course to Pluto. Meanwhile, Nikolai's family returns to Mars in a hacked rescue capsule, landing in the desert. They immediately spot their car passing by. That's where the second episode ends. Folks, if you're interested in finding out what happens next, please write about it in the comments, and we'll shoot the continuation. In a cabin in the middle of the forests of North Carolina, two people live, a woman named Nydia and her blind son Solomon. The only thing left from the father, a hunter, is an audio recording where he explains to the boy that they were forced to move to this place in the hope that his mother would be able to heal. But the hope was in vain. Nydia's condition only worsened. On that day, the mother calls her son to check the traps, Before leaving the house, the boy habitually ties a rope to his belt, the other end of which is attached to the porch. This measure is necessary so that the child can always find his way home, and so that the mother knows in which direction to look for him if something happens. The woman teaches Solomon how to set and find traps for animals and approves of how quickly he learns. Later, she shows him how to properly skin animals without damaging the fur, which can then be used to make clothing. One day, the curious boy catches an insect and traps it in a jar, only to be saddened when he notices that the beetle no longer makes any sound. The mother explains that living creatures cannot survive like this. They need air, food, and water. One day, the woman suggests that the child go fishing to celebrate the birthday of his deceased father, who loved this activity and always took Solomon with him. Afterward, she plans to bake a cake, which excites the boy. The pair head to the river. Suddenly, Solomon notes that all the animals and birds seem to have disappeared, and a ringing silence surrounds them. The woman, who also notices this, jokes that they were scared of the boy and warn the fish in the river. The boy relaxes, but the unpleasant feeling remains in his soul. Sitting by the shore, he suddenly asks questions about death. Nydia is surprised but explains that death is simply a change of existence, like a chrysalis turning into a butterfly. Life continues but in a different form. But why is Solomon interested in this? After all, he is young, full of energy, and will live for a long time. After sitting by the shore with their fishing rods and not getting a bite, the woman suggests that the boy dig up some worms. He happily agrees and ventures deeper into the forest. The boy finds some worms near a rotten tree and feels an iron chain under the leaves. But as soon as he tries to pull it to find out where it leads, the mother arrives, sensing something suspicious in the forest. She praises her son for finding the worms, but suggests they finish fishing for the day. The pair return home, where the mother tends to the household chores, the garden and the goat, which provides them with milk. Solomon helps dig up root vegetables. The mother praises her son for his help, hiding that she feels worse and worse. In the evening, she bakes the promised cake and suggests that her son sing the traditional song, but the boy doesn't like it. Then Nydia offers to let him blow out the candle on the cake in front of him, and Solomon fulfills the request, but he refuses to share his wish, believing it won't come true if he does. At night, the mother plays an audio recording she and the boy's father made for little Solomon. They tell a story about a little goat that once ran into the forest where a terrible monster lived. The parents loved their little goat very much and were inconsolable, but the goat, seeing the monster, managed to escape and return home, bringing great joy to his mother and father. They hugged him, and he promised never to return to the dark forest again. After listening to the story again, Solomon again raises the question of death, as he didn't understand his mother's earlier explanation. Then Nydia tells him about faith. However, the boy barely understands and declares that he believes in his mother above all else. The years pass, but one day the mother disappears, leaving the boy only a recording of her voice, in which she says goodbye to her son and reminds him of the 3 main rules of their life. He must always share with the forest everything he gets from it, half for him, half for the forest. The second rule, when he feels down and ready to give up, he must sing their song. And the third rule, he must never take off the rope. Time passes. Solomon becomes a teenager. He has fully adapted to life alone, hunting, fishing, chopping wood, and checking traps on his own. When he feels particularly sad, he listens to the tapes with the voices of his loved ones. One day, while eating near the house, the boy hears a strange sound from the thicket. Putting down his plate, he rushes into the forest but finds nothing unusual, though he senses someone's presence nearby. Before bed, he listens to his mother's voice recording again. However, he cannot sleep. The boy gets up and leaves the house. Then he hears the plaintive bleating of his goat and runs towards the sound until the rope reaches its limit. At the very edge of the rope's reach, he manages to feel the goat's body in the grass, but at that moment, something unknown grabs the animal and drags it into the depths of the forest. Feeling his hands, the boy realizes they are covered in blood and tries to wipe it off. Morning comes. Solomon is frightened but continues to live according to his established routine, but one day he suddenly hears a gunshot in the forest. The boy rushes in that direction and stumbles upon a dead deer. But then, a man emerges from the trees, claiming it as his kill. Frightened, Solomon begins to wave his knife, and the stranger is forced to knock him out with the butt of his rifle. The boy comes to his senses, near his house. The hunter, sitting opposite, tends to his wound, apologizing for the harm caused. He read the name on the knife, Lucas, and assumes that's the boy's name. But the boy admits that it was his father's name, who is now gone. The hunter apologizes again, saying he didn't mean to scare him, and noticing the rope, he carried him back to the house. Hank, the man's name, asks the young man why he lives alone and where his parents are, as the boy looks very young. But Solomon doesn't answer. The day is already ending, so the hunter asks for permission to spend the night in the house. In return, he offers some painkillers. When the boy refuses, as he doesn't know what pills are, Hank promises to cook a hot meal from the deer, and Solomon agrees. Hank examines the house from the inside and realizes that the young man has never left its boundaries and therefore simply doesn't know about the outside world. Meanwhile, the boy listens to his mother's last message, huddled in the corner of his room, feeling uncomfortable in the presence of a stranger. Hank finds homemade books that Solomon's mother made for him and feels sorry for the boy. He behaves kindly and generously offers the young man the soup he prepared. He again offers to help the boy, saying he can guide him to people and help him settle into the big world. But Solomon refuses, which Hank attributes to his deep love for home, lamenting that he himself doesn't have one. He again asks about the parents, saying the boy looks a lot like the woman in the photo, perhaps that is his mother. After dinner, they go to bed, though Solomon doesn't part with his knife, but realizing that Hank poses no threat, he finally lies down. However, in the middle of the night, both are awakened by a loud and terrifying sound, similar to the roar of an unknown animal. Hank, armed with a flashlight and rifle, goes outside to check what's happening. It's quiet around the house, and the man heads into the forest. Soon he finds blood traces at the base of a tree and realizes that some animal has died there. On the tree itself, there are bloody marks, and the bark is scraped off. Stopping, Hank surveys the area through his scope and notices something suspicious in the bushes. He fires, but the creature leaps from behind the tree with a terrifying roar and charges at him. Realizing he missed, the hunter runs. Reaching the house, he sees Solomon in some sort of trance. The boy just sways from side to side, humming a tune to himself, and doesn't respond to the man's questions. Hank, getting no answers, leaves him alone. After all, he believes he scared off the beast, and now they are safe. The man promises to get the boy out of the forest so he can live a normal life, unafraid of any monster. In the morning, Hank finds Solomon in the shed. He offers to repair it since all the necessary materials are there, except for the chain. Solomon recalls finding a chain in the forest as a child and takes Hank to the spot. The man marvels at how the boy navigates using the rope. The boy explains that it's the only way to survive. Soon they find the place. Hank, noticing the chain, grabs it and starts pulling, but realizing it's tied to something, he follows it and finds some kind of burrow. Nearby lie metal shears, which surprises Hank. However, he cuts off a piece of the chain and returns with it to the house. While the man works on the repairs, Solomon asks for a piece of venison, and after receiving permission, throws it into the bushes. To the hunter's surprise, the boy explains that it's a rule. Everything taken from the forest must be shared with it, as his parents taught him. The hunter believes this practice explains the appearance of the beast they heard at night. He suggests they set a trap for the monster to ensure the boy's safety. He also extends the rope, giving the young man the ability to explore new areas. Soon they both head in the direction where Hank saw the unknown beast. Cautiously moving between the trees, they reach the edge of the previously marked area. Suddenly, something unknown grabs the rope and starts pulling Solomon. The terrified hunter chases after the boy, and catching up with the abandoned Solomon, immediately leads him back to the house. Hank tries to calm the young man, assuring him that the beast won't enter the house and they will definitely catch it in the traps they set. He also found his mother's diary and offers to read it to Solomon. The boy listens intently, a thoughtful smile appearing as he hears the lines filled with love and tenderness directed at him. But suddenly Hank stops reading mid-sentence, having read something terrifying. Not wanting to scare the boy, he assures him it's already late and they should go to sleep. As always, Solomon listens to his mother's recording before bed and then goes to sleep. Meanwhile, Hank, making sure the boy's asleep, leaves the house and heads to the place where they found the chain. He approaches the burrow, sees a pile of gnawed bones in front of it, and realizes that this is the lair of the beast. Meanwhile, Solomon wakes up and begins to search for his new friend, and Hank, with his rifle ready, approaches the burrow and suddenly sees a notebook similar to the one in Solomon's house. But this one is scribbled with simple doodles. Deciding that the find has no value, the man puts it back. Meanwhile, realizing that Hank is not around, Solomon sits on the porch and turns on the tape recorder, listening to his mother's voice. But at that moment, he hears a gunshot in the forest. Finding the rope, Solomon runs into the forest, where he suddenly stumbles over Hank's backpack and realizes that the man is somewhere nearby. At that moment, the rope's length ends. For the first time in his life, Solomon breaks the rule and takes it off to find his friend. He crawls around and finds Hank's lifeless body. Solomon mourns his loss when he hears someone standing before him. The terrifying disheveled creature turns out to be Solomon's mother. Making inhuman sounds, she charges at him, but the chain restrains her. To drive away his fear, Solomon begins to hum the childhood melody. This makes the woman stop, and when she begins to hum along, the boy recognizes her. He cautiously approaches her, and when she lunges at him, she impales herself on a knife and dies. Her eyes, with strange vertical pupils, go still. The young man, coughing heavily, leans against a tree. Trying to recover from everything he's been through, he suddenly hears a crow cawing and looks up at the sky. And then, in his milky eyes, vertical pupils appear, meaning that along with his sight, he has inherited his mother's illness, becoming the new forest beast. A depressingly dull film that exudes hopelessness, cold, and a sense of inevitable futility. But the metaphor with the rope is very apt. A person should never lose their connection to home. At the beginning of the movie, we see an experienced fisherman heading out to sea. Like thousands of times before, he casts his net from the boat, but something goes wrong and the net gets caught on something on the ocean floor. The fisherman dives down, but he can't make it back to the surface as a huge school of fish surrounds him. Charlie, a lighthouse keeper, calls her colleagues in Germany to discuss current affairs. She's interrupted by a signal on her monitor and rushes off to investigate. Charlie has to swim to the duty boy to dive into the water and retrieve a sensor that somehow got tangled up in fishing nets. Strange things are also happening in Canada. Leon, a young whale researcher, is called to Vancouver's City Beach, where a giant killer whale washed up a couple of hours ago. After examining the animal, he heads to the fishing dock to find out who among the poachers caused serious cuts to the killer whale. An old fisherman takes Leon to his boat and shows him the bitten side of the vessel which was used to try and overturn the killer whale. Leon doesn't believe this story, but the man is sure that the fisherman wouldn't lie to him and that they had to destroy the whale to save themselves. Charlie and her new friend launch a repaired sensor into the ocean, tasked with tracking marine animal population. They notice methane ice fragments around the boat, which often rise to the surface, but today there are too many of them. Leon finally hears the whales and learns that they have been seen in various locations along the coast. Before heading out to sea, he calls his girlfriend Lizzie, who has already taken tourists on her boat to see killer whales in the wild. A giant whale appears next to Leon's boat. After freezing for a couple of minutes, the giant disappears underwater, but a whole pod of orcas takes its place. Lizzie takes the tourists onto the deck and everyone watches in awe as the whales appear. The humpback giant also appears next to the ship and the tourists are able to see it up close. The strange behavior of the whale pleases everyone except Leon, who tries to warn his friend but is too late. The next trick of the whale hits the metal of the boat. Leon arrives at the scene of the accident and tries to save those who survived the hit, but now a pod of orcas is hunting for the tourists. Leon is unable to save Lizzie. The action shifts to a French restaurant. After gathering fresh seafood at the market, the chef plans to prepare lobsters, but one of them shoots an unknown liquid into the man's face. After wiping his face, the chef continues working, but by evening he and two other cooks begin to feel ill. The chef passes away that same evening and the two young cooks are taken to the ICU, waiting for the test results to determine what happened. At the same time, a Norwegian ship in the sea lowers a camera to study an unusual phenomenon, an invasion of ice worms. A few specimens are brought to the surface for study, and the scientist finds a new peculiarity. These creatures have jaws and reproduce several times faster. A commission is formed and everyone agrees that they have discovered a new species of worms and bacteria. Leon talks to the owner of a fishing boat who was also a witness to the humpback whales attacking other boats the day before. In addition, Leon is shown another anomaly. The bottom of the ship that returned from the sea is covered with a thick layer of mollusks which has never been seen before. A group of scientists launches a sampler onto the seafloor to check the soil where worms were found, but due to a methane leak, an explosion occurs. The ship manages to survive, but the team is greatly frightened. The scientists are not only scared of the mistake during the operation, but also the results of the test. In addition to the worms on the seafloor, there are bacteria that eat ice and can reach the very bottom. Jess records a video message to Charlie when something strange suddenly happens and alarming readings appear on the monitors. The water under the ship starts boiling and something pulls it down into the depths. The action shifts to Venice. A young man in love reads poetry on a bridge when suddenly the book falls from his hands and ends up in the canal. The couple immediately forgets about the poetry book because before their eyes is an even stranger sight. Thousands of giant jellyfish rise to the surface. Analysis of the bacteria from the infected chef reveals a new strain that feeds on blood cells. It turns out that several more people have died after visiting the restaurant on the coast. Leon requests permission to perform an autopsy on the killer whale to find out how pollution affects whales and whether this could be related to changes in the behavior of these giants. There is nothing inside the whale that could scare the experts, but Leon finds an unknown substance in its brain which is sent for analysis. Another victim of infection appears, a young man from a car wash. By putting together all the events, the scientists understand that the bacteria spread from the restaurant through the water supply system. Leon is informed of new cases of whale attacks. Looking at the map, the guy finds a pattern. All the changes occur with the whales during migration. To verify his suspicions, the guy sails to the place where the whales are resting during their sleep. The dive almost ends in tragedy, but Leon manages to install a camera on one of the whales and get out. Sigurd finds out that the Japanese have also found the worms, but they are not in a hurry to report it to the world. Recordings from the cameras are checked in 2 laboratories at once. Leon's footage shows that the whale pod descended to the very bottom, where they were met with strange glowing. Far from the events, a new incident occurs on the coast. Hordes of crabs crawl out onto the streets of a small village. Another shot of the seabed finally lifts the veil of mystery. It turns out that one of the oil and gas companies was drilling ice in a forbidden place and damaged the seabed for several kilometers. Leon has to sneak through a fence to get to the guarded port area to collect a few more mussels for analysis from the ship, but he is caught by security and arrested. In the morning, Mr. Sato, the Japanese owner of the ship, contacts Leon. He asks the guy not to trespass on his territory in this way again, but promises to provide access to all materials for study. Charlie only now receives the message recorded by Jess a few minutes before the tragedy. When the emotions subside, the girl manages to notice some peculiarities on the recording. For example, a glow behind a porthole. Crabs are being delivered to the laboratory, which have started to emerge on the surface in different parts of the world. As expected, they too are filled with a strange substance that absorbs blood cells at an incredible speed. Charlie is reviewing the video repeatedly, not understanding what else is wrong with it. Finally, the girl's hearing catches a sound that is very similar to the sound from the deep sea recording. The girl contacts the laboratory and shows them a part of the recording that caught her attention. But her stern boss, Katerina, rejects all the scientists' ideas, considering the sound on different recordings to be just random noise. She orders Charlie to finish up the work and shut down the station for the winter without coming up with incredible theories. But after cooling down and carefully considering Charlie's words, Katerina still decides to test this hypothesis, and a helicopter with a group of scientists and a deep water device arrives on the island. The device is delivered to the island by Sigurd, and after handing it over to Charlie, he's about to leave. But at the same time, emergency messages come to the scientists on the mainland. They are only able to reach Sigurd and inform him that a terrifying tsunami is approaching the coast. Those who see it with their own eyes realize that there is no chance of survival. Sigurd manages to warn Charlie and they leave. At the conference, scientists give a report that the discovered bacteria intentionally infect humans, and soon everyone will have to flee far away from water sources. Leon tries to warn his fishermen friends about this, but none of them are ready to live on land, choosing to die in their familiar environment. Rahim meets Leon at the institute to participate in a scientific conference. The best minds gather to discuss what is happening, and most agree that there is some force at work that wants to drive people out of the ocean. Only Katerina is against everyone else. She refuses to abandon the knowledge and convictions gained through years of experience, so she orders the group to seek a logical explanation based on science. Despite objections from their mentor, the group of scientists presents their theory to the public, convincing the government that marine inhabitants infected with bacteria are intentionally attacking humans. They even give the new intelligence a name, the However, such a version only elicits irony from top officials, who also suggest finding more scientific solutions to a problem than negotiating with an unknown intelligence. Astrophysicist Samantha Grove comes to the scientists' aid. Unlike politicians, she carefully studied the report and agrees that the strange sound on different recordings has all the characteristics of an unfamiliar world language. In addition, his team managed to capture the exact same signal from Antarctica. Another influential person, Japanese Mifuno, also believes in Sigur's theory and agrees to finance his venture, hoping it will help to save the world. Sigur assembles the team and informs them of the start of the mission. He suggests everyone think carefully and assess the risks, and those willing to go all the way will be waiting for an expedition to the Arctic in 48 hours. The scientists go home to say goodbye to their loved ones and warn them of their departure. The relatives of many try to persuade them to stay, but everyone understands that this is their last chance to fix something. According to scientists' calculations, the largest accumulation of intelligent bacteria is located in one of the valleys in Antarctica, where they could have lived for millions of years prior. The company is preparing to establish contact, and everyone is playing their role while giving interviews to a young journalist. Finally, the equipment on the ship starts buzzing with interference, and the scientists prepare to capture a signal from the mysterious organism. Sarah, Mifuno's assistant, sits down next to Leon at the table and confesses to him that she would have never believed in their theory if it weren't for her boss, who has proven over many years that his intuition never fails. Samantha is devising a plan. She intends to add a sound of a human child scream to the organism's audio signal and return the recording to the intelligence to show that they are ready to communicate. Charlie asks a colleague to take her with him in the diving apparatus to the bottom. The ship drops anchor and the scientists begin transmitting the sound message. Meanwhile, the daring couple gets into the capsule and prepares to dive to the depths. The whole team is eagerly awaiting any reaction, and finally movement appears on the radar and the sensors pick up a sound signal. The team from the capsule tries to contact the captain's bridge to report that their fans are malfunctioning and they are running out of oxygen, but communication is not working. The chief pilot, Luther, is ready to return, but Charlie notices some movement and turns off the lights, waiting to see what happens next. On the ship, they also notice something approaching. Sigur insists that the captain recall the submarine, but they can't reach the group. Luther doesn't want to risk anymore and he lifts the boat. On the ship, a hatch opens to receive the capsule into a special compartment. Charlie notices a strange glow appearing around them at that moment, but she doesn't tell anyone about it. Meanwhile, Samantha reports that they have managed to establish contact. The sound signal has returned and the child's cry has been altered as a sign that the bacteria understood the message from humans. Dr. Chase is looking for a way to cure those who have already been infected by the bacteria. Luther tells the journalist that he saw nothing at the depth, and everything Charlie saw was probably a figment of her imagination, just like the whole idea of intelligence. Nevertheless, Samantha tries to decipher the messages to assemble them into a response signal that the intelligence will understand. While staying in the compartment with the capsule, the journalist notices a glow in the pool. The lights on the ship go out and interference begins. When everything is restored, the captain sees the journalist's body fallen on the monitor. Chase tries to save the girl, and on her lips she notices a liquid resembling cerebrospinal fluid. Samantha tells the team and the captain that during the voltage surge there was a signal surge and it was so low that no one heard it. But most importantly, in the opinion of the astrophysicist, it originated from inside the ship. Charlie listens to what her colleagues are saying, but she never musters the courage to tell them that they brought the bacteria into the pool. Leon visits the girl, whose body has become covered in strange spots. The doctor asks the guy and Sarah for help. They must hold the girl while she takes a sample of the spinal fluid for analysis. The doctor tells the team about the results of the analysis. The substance previously found in marine creatures was discovered in Alicia's spinal cord. Chase believes that bacteria were attempting to merge with the girl's cells, and Charlie admits to seeing the glowing enter the ship with them. Samantha records a new message for the this time including an audio image from the astrophysicist. Charlie goes down to the sealed compartment without permission, and the pool starts glowing again, creating unusual shapes with the light. At that moment, Samantha receives a response message from the entity, which also contains an image. Mr. Mifuno's helicopter lands on the ship as he wants to be present for the opening. Sigur shows him the recording from the pool cameras and the image sent in response to Samantha's message. According to the astrophysicist, they have an image of the super ocean that surrounded a supercontinent millions of years ago. According to the scientists, the reminded them that they were, are, and will be on Earth much longer than humans, and all they want is for the oceans to be left alone and not destroyed. But there is good news. Since the entity is responding to messages, the team has a chance to negotiate and reach a ceasefire. In the meantime, Chase devises a drug that can destroy bacteria that consume blood cells. This news creates disagreement within the team. Mifuno plans to test the substance in the pool and if it works, completely destroy the Sigurd disagrees with this, at least until they confirm that they cannot negotiate with the Chase tries to take the middle ground and suggests trying the drug in the pool but not rushing to launch it into the open ocean. Everyone gathers to watch the experiment. Chase launches the drug into the water, which immediately begins to rise, emitting a terrible scream that shatters the glass. The captain is informed that nothing is working on the ship and they are simply drifting in the waters of Antarctica, but worse, the ship is surrounded by icebergs. The vessel collides with an iceberg, but unexpectedly a blue glow takes it somewhere else. The captain orders the engines to be started to break free from the control of the He also doesn't understand why they don't pour all the drug they have on board into the water. But Sigurd tries to explain to the captain that everything that happened now is the price for his thoughtless experiment in the pool, and no one in the world will manufacture enough of the substance to destroy worldwide. The only way out is to make a truce. While the team is deciding how to negotiate with the entity traps the ship between the icebergs. Charlie hurries to the capsule to descend and deliver Luther's body to as a sign of complete obedience. Once at depth, Charlie changes her plan. She injects leukocytes into her heart that can merge with and opens the capsule door. The body falls under the control of and the icebergs release the ship while billions of lights envelop the girl underwater. Later, Charlie brings the ship to a deserted island. It opens its eyes and looks at the sky with glowing blue eyes. The series ends here. Please write in the comments what you think about this series.